Hey, good morning. We're just going to kind of get started, if that sounds good. And if people can gather as they want to. But welcome to our workshop today. Just really thank all of you for coming out and joining us just so we can have a great conversation and have community as well, too. So this is our From Mission to Momentum, so championing DEI efforts in a very ever-changing landscape that I think we can all agree about. And I think the main reason that we're here, I'm very thankful. This is actually my fourth year of getting to organize this content. And the reason we're here is actually the same reason I had started kind of pitching this 4 years ago, is that, we're still, hoping, we're still wishing, we're still reaching for something that sometimes can feel out of our reach, and that's equity. That's closing these opportunity gaps. It's speaking for those who are silenced. It's also pulling those who are pushed into darkness back into the light. And that's why we need to be here. That's why I'm really thankful for all of your faces to be here to kind of have this conversation so we can keep that momentum going no matter what the roadblocks and what the barriers may come, especially in times where our national conversations and executive orders try to keep these conversations from happening. So I think even more now than ever, we have to come together. And so I just want to first say thank you to just all of you for being here. I think, it's so important to have community and networking. And actually, this first part is actually built to have a little bit of flexibility so that we can build those scaffolding that we need to be together. I also want to thank ADIM and CORD for making these communities that we can actually work together instead of working in silos. I think oftentimes what we see is people are reduplicating the work. There's that minority tax because it's still all of us doing that work. And so I really appreciate that we can kind of come together and kind of continue the conversations. So CORD actually has a DEI conference in the fall, and this is a continuation of that conversation here. So we're very thankful. So definitely join both groups because you'll have a great community among both. And so let me just give you a quick layout of the day today. So we have a lot of different kind of offerings to you. So we'll start with our introductions. Then we're going to have a plenary panel that will actually talk about the landscape, because I think it's important and authentic to talk about the challenges, but then also rooted in positivity of the things and the power that we actually do have to make changes. We'll have a quick coffee break, and there is coffee out there. So if you need to step out now, no problem. I understand the caffeine deficiency that happens. And then after that, we'll actually talk about those roadblocks that exist and give some tactical guide on how to push forward. We have a series of lightning talks on how to increase belonging and inclusion through allyship, through sponsorship, and also mentorship and creating inclusive environment in the promotion and retention sphere. And then at the end, our rising in one day president of ADIM, Ryan, and myself will be having a workshop. So really, how do you put everything that we're talking to into action? And we actually have a sheet that you can fill out, because I think oftentimes awareness is great, but it's like, what am I going to do when I get back into those rooms that people don't want to hear this and they need to? And so this is going to be really important to say, what are some concrete steps that we can do that are actionable and kind of give us that locus of power? And then at the end, we'll kind of have our last kind of reflection activity as well, too. And so I wanted to start by doing introductions, because I think it's really important. And oftentimes when we do introductions, I think it's always just like, hey, I'm Sri, I'm from Duke, I'm an APD there for the past 10 years. And that's great. You could probably Google that and hear about that. But DEI work, it really is important to think of it as relational work, as networks. And I think once we all are able to kind of like power together, then our charge and actually our power is undeniable, that we're able to push the needle. So it would look very different if I actually say, hey, I have a twin sister who is, God knew I needed someone by my side from the very beginning, so he gave her to me in my mom's womb, right? And we get to walk our lives together through the challenges. And she's a cool twin with tattoos and piercings and pink hair, and I get to kind of follow along with that. Or if I tell you I actually have 4 kids who inspire me to be better and to show up at life and kind of really, experience life to the fullest. Or I could tell you that actually my parents are immigrants from India, and all of my family, all 6 of my aunts and uncles on either side are all in India. So I miss them, and I miss out on their lives. And so for me, I have to take this opportunity being here in America to make it worth it for my parents' sacrifice. That tells you a different story about who I am and how I live my life. And so this is why I borrowed this from Emily Cleveland when we did a DEI session a couple of years ago. But I really appreciate, she taught me this, that we actually are much more than our titles and our roles. Our authentic self is actually sometimes the person we leave at the door when we step on our shift, or sometimes the person we leave at home when we come to conferences. But how much more powerful would we be if we came here and shared our struggles, shared who we are in this room itself? So this is just an invitation to share as little, as much as you want to your tables. But we'll give you just a couple minutes to kind of just introduce yourselves, because my hope is that the networks that you make here, you'll be able to carry with you outside of this room to have your team kind of cheering you on as you're trying to push this work forward. So we'll give you a couple minutes and then we'll jump into the content.
It was sometimes one investigator or multiple. So
Okay, we'll kind of, it's great to hear the conversations. I think we were just talking about this. You know, I think oftentimes we don't create a space to actually get to know each other outside of our roles and responsibilities. And so, but there's so much more that we carry with ourselves into this space. And then you get to see a lot of the connections and kind of similar interests and things like that, that it really can build relationships, which is so important for this work, and also just important for relationships as a whole. So what we'll do is we'll transition to our panel discussion, if that sounds great. So I'll have my panelists come on up, and we'll kind of get started on that part of it. And definitely, if you want to move closer, just for our audience, feel free to sit anywhere you want to. Awesome. So we'll spend like the next 40, 45 minutes or so just in our panel discussion, just talking a little bit about the changing educational landscape. And I think this is so important there's so many different facets of this to talk about. So we'll definitely jump in, and I'll have each of my panelists introduce themselves in just 1 second. So we'll kind of jump in, but we have no disclosures. This is our obligatory slides. If you have any talks later on this week and anyone has disclosures, watch out for Andrea, because she will be very stern about changing that. So I got to listen in on that this morning, which was very challenging, I think. But here's our kind of session objective. So we're really going to think kind of critically on the kind of current political climate and kind of how these internal and external factors affect the way that we're able to do this work, which I think is really important. We'll actually apply some kind of tools and strategies that we've learned throughout the years on how to navigate this, and then finally, hopefully plant some seeds for some actionable plans that you can do. And we have that time at the end of this workshop to actually put that into action as well too. So we'll be planting seeds about that, of some of the things that we've been able to do to kind of keep the work moving forward, and maybe you can apply that in the action plan section later on today. So let's first start by meeting our panel, and I'm actually going to have we'll go down here. I'll have you just introduce yourselves, if that sounds good for the room, and then we'll jump into the first question. Yeah. So if you want to say your background, kind of what got you interested in this work, I think all of that would be, and any of the whole body introduction would be great.
Well, good morning again, everyone. My name is Ken Kennedy. I am one of the faculty members over at Duke University Hospital, serve as one of the APDs there as well. I am also co-chair of what we call our CEI committee, our community engagement and impact, formerly known as JEDI, formerly known as DEI, so on and so forth. I also work with our medical students and medical student education, so I have a few different hats here. In regards to how I got involved with this work and understanding why it is important, I realized that along the way, as I was going into medicine, there were times when I wished I had someone that looked like me or someone who presented themselves in the way that I did to kind of offer themselves as a mentor, as someone who would be able to kind of help guide me along the way. And so as I started to go into medical school residency and ultimately as a faculty member, I wanted to be the thing that I wish I had. And so also one other thing about me is that I was a nurse for about 4 years before going to medical school. And so my entire way of kind of looking at medicine has been a bit different along the way. And so my path has been different. I needed a little bit more guidance, and I just needed something or someone to help me along the way. And so, as I mentioned before, I just wanted to be the person that I wish I had during that time frame.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Katrina Gibson. I am recently joining the faculty at Vanderbilt now. It's almost been a year. I also have the pleasure of serving as their inaugural director of advocacy. So what that may look like in this current political landscape, we're not sure, but I am excited to find out. I've also been active in SAEM for the next, for another 48 hours, I suppose. I'm still immediate past president of ADIM and recently joined the SAEM bylaws committee. So I think that this organization has been excellent for professional development as well as, just even personal connections as well. And for me, I think that my work in DEI was ingrained in me from a very young age, as far as I grew up in a family of advocates and those who just had a commitment to making change. And I've just had the opportunity for this to kind of be the fabric for my personal and professional development. So I think that regardless of what the political climate looks like, or regardless of even of the organization with which you are working, I think that DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, is something that benefits us all. So whether the language changes or whether the political climate does, the work needs to be done. And I am just fortunate to have this organization as one of many tools in the toolkit to kind of make the changes that we need to improve health equity and interpersonal relationships in our field.
Good morning. I'm Adam McFarland. I'm an assistant residency program director at University Hospitals Cleveland, Case Western, as well as our medical education fellowship director. And I'm pretty heavily involved in the CORD DEI committee and help plan the virtual conference, which I've done with Sri for the past couple of years. Did my residency at Boston Medical Center, and then did a fellowship at the University of Chicago before coming over to UH. I think my journey in this space, has been pretty sequential. I was mentioning earlier that I'm from a very small, homogenous town in Michigan, and my family and the people that I was involved with, diversity was never something that we talked about or really valued. And as I sort of progressed through my career, I think I began to understand the ways in which my privilege as a white man, and I identify as gay, but that's an invisible identity that I can hide, how that helped pave the way for my successes in my life and how those inequities exist for other people. And I felt kind of my moral calling to utilize that privilege to try to make a difference when I can in the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So.
Good morning. My name is Ryan Tuchita. I'm at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, Wisconsin. I am currently serve as the Assistant Dean for Multicultural Affairs for Health Professions Learners there, and do a lot of diversity work for the school and for the department. It's a long story as far as how I got into diversity work. The one story, the way that I sometimes will say it is it's what I've always been doing, and not always in that word, and I didn't always know it that way. Sometimes it was, outreach in the churches that I grew up with, and then it became doing some more LGBTQ focused stuff, and undergrad and medical school. And then it turned into a little bit more of a broader portfolio, really broadly trying to kind of overcome what I see as historical discrimination. I think a little bit of what you were talking about, Adam, and sometimes I just continue to learn more and more stories about really just atrocious activities and historical kind of ways in which we've kind of created the problems that we have in society today. And that problem sat with me and is something that really motivates me to do the work. And so that's a little bit of my background, but I could talk about that for 4 hours. So, yeah.
And we will soon, right? So I'm Emily Binstadt. Nice to meet you all. I feel privileged to be on this panel and also in the midst of you all, so thank you for being here. I am an attending at Regents Hospital in St. Paul, Minnesota, and we're affiliated with the University of Minnesota as far as our learners that come through our department. So I'm an associate professor there. My background is also not a clear path to this destination, but I do find that it is actually clear if you look through, and longstanding. I guess I would just say I have an interest in injustice that has been throughout my life, and probably maybe it's just part of my personality because I was fighting with my parents from a young age about this stuff. But as far as like credentials in the way of DEI, I'm past chair of the Equity and SAEM's Equity and Inclusion Committee that was sunsetted, which is another discussion. But I feel like this is a very important, very supportive networking group. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Okay. And the second part of this question, just if anyone wanted to elaborate, is like, was there like a moment this past year, a couple years, that kind of shifted how you approach this work? Because we know that, in different institutions and things like that, actually some of these words are actually illegal, if you will, or kind of looked down upon as well. And so there's a lot of challenges that we face in doing this work, but even saying the work that we're doing. So was there any like a moment or something that you that shifted the way that you had to approach doing this work?
So this question kind of resonated with me because I mentioned before that I was switching institutions. For the last 7 years, I'd been Emory faculty at Grady, and then I transitioned into Vanderbilt. I'll never forget, I was at a AAMC leadership program along with Ryan, and my chair at Vanderbilt called me. It's a Friday afternoon, so anytime like your chair is calling you on a Friday, it's like, what is going on? I was like, take a deep breath, and I go to the next room, and he's like, hey, Katrina, we're still happy to have you, but, if DEI is like what you want to kind of lead with your career, if that's that's going to be like your thing, then maybe, Vanderbilt isn't the best place for you, but we'll figure out something else. And I just distinctly remember, it was one of those things where, we all watch the news, I knew where I'm going and why. But with that being said, my heart kind of like dropped into my stomach. But with that being said, and I think that this will, resonate with folks, because regardless of where you are, I'm going to be who I am. My morals, the things that matter to me, I'm looking at health equity as a form of social justice and advocacy. Those things are evergreen for me. So it doesn't matter if I'm in Atlanta or Nashville or wherever else, the path may lead me. So I think that experience kind of really emphasize several things for me. Number one, you need to make sure that you establish your North Star, and if this is what it's going to be for you, you need to understand that the support may not always be there in the same way that you'd like it for it to be, and you also need to be willing to pivot, because the things that matter to us, the things that are important to our patients and our learners are always the same, but you might need to pivot and have to change the language. So maybe, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging is not popular where you are, but perhaps those things, kind of can translate into quality improvement, into, increased parameters. So you just need to understand your audience, to whom you're speaking, and figure out so that you're not compromising, but instead you are pivoting and adapting to make sure that you're still doing the work that is important to to move along health equity and improved outcomes for our patients and diversifying our pipeline. But yes, if your chair calls you on a Friday on your cell phone, prepare. But that is something that definitely stood out for me in this past year as I'm packing up my things to start this new life. So.
I don't think any one thing has kind of stood out to me as a pipeline of things. But to your point, the work itself is the same. The language may have changed, but the work itself is the same. And no matter what you call it, we're still doing the things that are good for our patients, for the next generation of physicians that are coming along behind us, and making sure that we are being very thoughtful about the work that we're doing. So again, no matter what you call it, whether it's DEI or quality improvement or whatever it may be, it's all going to be the same regardless.
So I actually want to know like who's in the audience real quick, if that's okay. So and just for everyone else, at our table we had like a great potpourri of medical students. And so we have a third-year medical student, MSCP fifth year, fourth-year medical student, fourth. Oh yeah, everyone's rising in their titles right now. So we had lots of students, which was like fantastic. And I'm just curious a little bit like where you all are at in kind of life and training, because I want to make sure it speaks to you all.
I'm a vice chair at Washington.
Awesome.
And I'm junior faculty at Washington.
Awesome.
I'm an R2 at also.
Oh, good. We have the whole spectrum. I love it. This is perfect. So, well, great. Thank you. One of the things I want to kind of level set, and I don't know how much folks know, and I think it's maybe potentially hard if you're a student to know all of this, but just to talk about what happened last year. So there was multiple executive orders from the federal government that basically made a lot of what we do in DEI work illegal, specifically around race and gender kind of consideration for participation for programs, which has been increasingly interpreted in broader and broader contexts. So it sort of started with the Supreme Court case actually before then about Students for Fair Admissions. And then it became about participation in programs. And then it became about anything that could potentially become, it became more than just admissions, it became everything. And so it really rocked a lot of the way in which our programming was designed, the way that we kind of, the words that we can use and so forth. At the same time, there are also tying funding for everything else about the schools. So just normal research dollars that are, it's for AI, like, you know, like whatever's like the hot topic right now. Researchers and institutions had to attest that they were not doing, quote, illegal DEI. And that was the degree that they defined it. So are you doing illegal DEI? I mean, I don't know, right? Like that was the question that they asked, and you had to attest to that. And there was a lot of fear because there's a lot of lawsuits, right, that they're going after. So there's a real risk. And so the risk aversion went to zero. And schools pulled back drastically. So I know we all lived it, but I just want to say it and just remind folks because like that like informs a lot of like why we're here and what we're talking about right now. What I will say to answer the question is that through this course, I have tried to say one of two things. One is you can say the way that we do things is illegal. You cannot change the fact that there's problems. And you can't change the fact that there is student mistreatment. You cannot change the fact that there's historical discrimination. You cannot change the fact that there's differences in health outcomes. Those problems are the same. They have not changed at one bit. Now, how we go about solving them, that's the open question. It's sort of an experiment, right? We tried something, they said we can't do it, okay. But the problems haven't gone away, and so like we'll find those solutions. So sort of a little bit, Katrina, to the North Star kind of thing, like we still have those problems and we still need to address them. Okay, we're playing by different rules, it's a mess, but like we'll figure it out. So that's one of the ways that I've kind of approached this change. The other is to say that we really need to try to be specific about the language that we're using and trying to reel in some of the risk aversion. And so these are conversations with lawyers and things like that, which are a very different part of what we do. But to give one example is what's ended up happening is there's been this increasing concern about what could be considered race, or gender exclusion. And there's a big concern about what's a potential proxy. So they don't want you to say, well, the federal government doesn't want you to say, well, if you're just thinking of something in a particular way, even if it's not race, it's kind of like race, it works as race, it's still a race-based participation exclusion. That can get become a really slippery slope really quick. And so I really try to push back on that. So for example, there was programs that we had that were for like an urban training program where they go to Milwaukee and they get experience in Milwaukee. And I was told, well, that's a proxy for race. And I said, it's absolutely not a proxy for race. And if we're going to talk about that, we need to talk about a rural program too, which is really important as well. And so really trying to make sure that we're not going, like the pendulum's swinging too far right now, right? Like, and there's an argument maybe the pendulum's swinging too far in the other direction, who knows? But like it's too far. And so I'm just trying to get us back to the middle is where I see ourselves. So anyway, yeah.
Finish.
No, that's it.
So I would just add kind of the counterpoint to that. The
Okay,
work
yeah.
that you're doing is so important with trying to name things and use appropriate language and whatever else, but there's a counterpoint that also I think is important, and that's where my moment has been for the last year, where I feel like that language in my institution to some extent has been silenced. And I was that voice, and I kind of have been silenced, let's be real. And then that combination with the sunsetting of the committee that I was on at SAEM, it was a painful process. But I've also been in Minnesota for the last year and realized how much seemingly insignificant doing the right thing moment on an individual interaction basis makes all the difference. Throw it all together, all those people doing the right things, even if they don't know what the name is. And to some extent, we've given them and us that language before this crackdown began, and it's still persisting. So.
And that actually ties into this kind of question for actually everybody talking to everybody. But really the communication strategies. So a lot of times at institutions, as you'll hear, we do more than we're supposed to censor ourselves, right? We're our worst enemies. So we actually say, okay, to avoid getting in trouble, I'm just going to stop the work completely, right? And there are institutions that did that, right? Because, and for safety and fear, right? Because fear actually drives a lot of change, unfortunately, and then to undo that fear gets much harder. So you might take 2 steps forward, but I always believe there's still a step forward you could take after that. So, but we just have to be careful. But the language and communication is so important. So while the work we do is the same, maybe the way we communicate it might be differently. So we heard a little bit, but if you have any strategies of how you've been communicating that, I think that would be really helpful for the group.
Yeah, I was sort of going to talk about this with the last question. So my interest in my work is very heavily involved in the integration of medical education, particularly graduate medical education with DEI principles. And I felt like in the last 2 years, people have felt very comfortable coming up to me and discussing their displeasure with what DEI means and sort of their interpretation of those principles. And so what I felt like my communication around incorporating DEI into medical education is more about trying to incorporate them structurally and into topics that are essential to emergency medicine and not siloed as separate DEI topics. So understanding the idea that, when we're talking about intimate partner violence, that's something that's essential to our jobs of emergency medicine, and sort of switching this from this is a value that you should have to something that this is just a practice of emergency medicine. And I've tried to restructure things like in the fellowship too. We talk about a whole session on bias and assessment, right? And so those are things where those conversations about racial bias and assessment pop up because we're talking broadly about the topic in general, and it's not a separate DEI day with our fellows. So what I've tried to do is try to restructure the principles in such a way that people that are resistant to DEI are engaging with those topics without the understanding that this is a DEI topic. It's kind of tricking them in a sense, to be honest with you, but that's what my approach has been.
I guess it kind of forces you to be a bit innovative in the way you're thinking about things. And I think in that way, in being innovative, it kind of potentially can push the field forward as well. In terms of strategies and how to communicate some of these things, I think it's important the way in which it's important how we use words and how we keep people in conversations. I think one of the things that I have learned to try to do better at, and I think Sri can attest to this, is how I approach the question, or how I approach the way in which I am speaking to someone. Instead of coming at them with a conclusion already in my mind about what I think about them or what I think about what it is that they're doing, I try to probe a little bit. Like, tell me a little bit more, or can you give me a bit more information so that way I can kind of meet you where you are. So I'm trying to do these Jedi mind tricks that you're talking about over here, where it allows me to get a better baseline understanding of what it is that they think, and then allow me to tailor my conversation to meet them where they are and potentially bring them around. My hope is not to change their mind in that one conversation, but eventually over time, after repeated conversations, after repeated dialogue, that we can get to the same language and to the same understanding as well.
Yeah, and I think the key for a lot of, I read way too many communication books, sadly, and productivity books. I'd be much better at communicating and productivity if I actually practiced it instead of just reading about it. But I think that the key for most of the themes that come across once you read a lot of the research and stuff, it talks about kind of meeting people where they're at, entering that space with curiosity, because we don't know the lived experience they're bringing into that conversation, and then helping to plant seeds, right? We may not see the trees that grow and the fruit that grows from those seeds, but we plant seeds that we hope later on will kind of bear fruit, and that's all we can do. And it's fun to actually, you'll see in your careers, you'll meet the same people later on who might now be advocates or might actually at least recognize that this is a problem. So I think there's a lot of ways. So don't minimize kind of planting those seeds, because it really will kind of bear fruit later on. And this kind of leads to our next question. So initiatives that have faced resistance, which I think we have all have felt, and we heard a little bit about this, but how did you kind of approach that? And then also, how did you move forward? 'Cause I think that's the hardest thing, is not getting into that deep valley that you can't kind of come back out and keep doing the work.
Yeah, I think this is what I alluded to, right? So this is this has been a tough couple years, but it's not just for me. This is for all of us in this space. I think you have to find where your comfort zone is. I think this resonates with choosing language to describe the work that we do. I think also just the initial hurt was being told that the thing you were doing basically as your pro bono job is now illegal. Like that hurts. You're a criminal. Like, what? None of this is criminal, and you know that in your heart of hearts, right? This is right. We do it because it feels right. It's always felt right. And I also think finding, for me, a space or an entree into this was not being a part of what I saw as, I don't even know what the right word is, like grandstanding. Large statements without action behind them were really bothersome to me at the beginning. Like pre-pandemic, there was a moment where all these companies and there was like a lot of statements, great, but with nothing behind them, and I didn't want to be a part of that, but I wanted to do something. And I also wanted to inform myself and be better, right? And I think coming back to that after the last 2 years has been how I've reframed and recentered, is focusing on what are the things you can do rather than the statements you can make, because ultimately that's what's important, right? And so finding those moments with an individual person who, maybe it's a resident, who realizes that you're there and you support them, even though those broad statements are not being made anymore. I think that's where I've found the sustaining force to move forward.
Yeah, I go back to sort of being a bit pragmatic about like what the actual problem is. So a little bit of that, like, let's define what we're talking about. Let's make sure that it's exactly like we're all on the same page. That's like shared understanding. I do think I'll go back to language, where I think one of the problems right now is we've lost a shared language. So DEI was convenient or useful in the sense that like it was an understanded term. that everybody understood. So everyone's title right now, I don't know, it's all different right now. And so at our institution, it's social impact and belonging. I mean, it's great, you know, but like, then if I told you I do social impact and belonging, you go, oh, what's that? Or, or if we talk about participation, right, when we're doing underrepresented in medicine, that was something that everyone identified with. They're like, oh, I'm URIM, right? But now nobody tells me, oh, I'm from a zip code that HRSA designates as low income based on the percentage of free and reduced lunch for our school. That's how we're writing grants now. Which is an okay way. That's an important thing that we need to do, but it's not a shared language that people understand. And that gets it really hard to kind of think about what change looks like and getting everyone on the same board. So, you know, our school our university has been working on some more shared language that I think is going to be really helpful. And I think maybe that's where we can be proactive as leaders in this space, call it DEI or what, to start getting those phrases out, those words out. And frankly, we don't know what they are yet. Like when we were at AAMC, it was targeted universalism, but I haven't heard anyone else say that. And you know, but it's a great concept. You look at it and you're like, oh, this is great. We just don't have that right now, and we're in that transition period, which makes things tough. Yeah.
So one of the things we did as the Equity and Inclusion Committee was we created this curriculum. We call it the DEI curriculum, and it's still present on the SAEM website. And it was like everybody in these circles contributed. So for the med students out there, there is a resource that is still there, and it talks, I mean, basically a lot of it was based on definitions and then like all of the instructional materials that you might use to give a lecture or do a talk or whatever. I think it would be wonderful as we coalesce around new terminology, because we've been told we can't use some of that old terminology, to revisit that, edit it, and make it a living document. So if you have a passion within SAEM for that kind of work, I think there's still opportunity for that.
And I think it's authentic to the work to know that, like, we will meet resistance, right? The only way you have change is that you need to have someone who's opposed to that change to actually be moving it forward. So in some ways, I think just the nature of this work and the inequities that we see every single day when we show up to our shift kind of keeps this work moving. And I think I agree with you that I think once you tied that this is emergency medicine, this is why our field was created, for these inequities that are the lived experiences of our patients once we click discharge and they go back home. I think it changes the way that our departments can actually show up for our patients and also keep this work moving forward to kind of meet those like throughput metrics, those kind of resource metrics, all those things that they care about. We care about the human behind it. And so it's fine. They could call it however they want to, as long as it still gives my patients the resources they need and the care they need, and that comfort that they need to say, like, you're seen and you're valued and I want to help you. So I think in some ways it's okay to embrace the resistance, because then we could get to be creative. And this is why our networks are so important, because maybe the problem that you've encountered, someone else has already encountered, and they might be able to share their tools with you as well. And that kind of moves to the next question, which is about, like I mentioned before, DEI work it's relational work. It's networks and scaffoldings together to be able to move this forward. If one department is doing amazing, but the next one isn't, it's not going to kind of move the mark for our specialty and especially for our patients. So how have you guys been able to kind of like do this coalition building, either across your institutions or across different organizations?
So this question, I'll start from the previous question. So one of the things that I am very interested in, and some of my work that I do in my research interest, is health equity, and again, using that as a way of looking at social justice. So my research kind of lends itself to that frame. So one of the things that I do is looking at the intersection of law enforcement and patient care, specifically in the emergency department, and understanding how the presence of law enforcement in the emergency department can act as a barrier to accessing care, specifically in the context of individuals who may have warrants, or more specifically, when we look at some of the executive orders that have been put out and some of our patients who may fear deportation because of their undocumented status. And so I was preparing to do this work, had some things lined up specifically with some of our community partners here as well, and was going to submit a grant for funding. And before I was able to do so, the institution stopped me. One, because they did not feel the work was it was on the no-no list for the administration, but then also the institution that we were applying for the grant for was potentially also on the no-no list. So I got a little bit of a double whammy on that. So the lawyers got involved, made us change a lot of things, made us restructure the way in which we articulated what we needed to do, and even also potentially almost made us resubmit the grant to someone else. Long story short, we were able to kind of be innovative with our language, understand that we potentially may need to, I got you, me and you both. You're not by yourself. Be a bit innovative with our language, but then ultimately the lawyers did say that it was okay to go ahead and proceed. One of the things that I kind of want to use to tie back into this idea of coalition building, I think part of the thing that made me feel so strongly about this was that I got a chance to work with some of my community partners. There's a person by the name of Dr. Wanda Boone who works for Together for Resilient Youth, which is a community organization that helps walk alongside patients and community members in their both medical journeys, but then also specifically targeting those with opioid addiction, things of that nature here as well. And one of the things that I've learned, especially in being in this space, is that as I am trying to work in the community and be a part of the community and to do things for the community, I have to be in the community to do that. And as I am trying to do that, I have to have people that can give me, for lack of a better word, clout. Right? I'm not from North Carolina. I moved here to do residency and stayed on as faculty, but Dr. Boone has always been here. She knows these people. She knows their family members. And so in order for me to be able to do the work that I think is important, and hopefully they will think is important as well, I have to be able to have an introduction in that way by having someone like her to introduce me and to give me some of her expertise and clout there. So as it pertains to the question of why collaboration is important, I think it's important that we don't remain in silos. It's important that we share our ideas, understanding what hurdles you've kind of come across as you are also working in the context of health equity, and sharing those things with each other and making sure that we are all being successful as we kind of push forward as well.
One of the ways that I think that I've found success is making sure that we work with our colleagues within other departments. It's so easy to get siloed even within emergency medicine. So it was like, wait a minute, there are other departments as well. So I think when we're defining a research problem, or you're thinking about a program that might actually, to solve a problem that our patients face, I'm like, okay, well, who else deals with this? And one of the things that I'm starting working on now is a hospital-based violence intervention program. So of course, that's emergency medicine, that's trauma, that's internal medicine. So when you start looking at other departments, you start thinking, you have all these different vantage points of which to address this problem, and you also have departmental dollars that could address this problem as well. And and it also, I think, gives you additional language, as we talked about communication and labeling, as to how to address a problem. So for instance, let's say I want to address, mortality, infant mortality rates or maternal mortality rates. That's emergency medicine. We see these patients as well. That's also, OB-GYN. And I'm also addressing a health equity issue without actually saying I'm addressing a health equity issue. So we define the problem, and by doing so, by default, you're looking at the groups of people who disproportionately are facing these problems, whether it's due to their race, their socioeconomic status, their gender, et cetera. So once again, we're just being a little bit stealth. We're defining the patient population that we want to help, we're defining our colleagues who are most likely to be involved in helping them, whether it's our trauma surgery friends, whether it's, OB-GYN, whether it's internal medicine. So we're pooling our resources, we're pooling our vantage points, and at the end of the day, we are still finding ways in which we can address these healthcare inequities that are plaguing our patients without necessarily worrying about, are we stepping on toes and maybe, doing something that's illegal. But we're solving the problem because, we're emergency medicine doctors. That's what we do. We problem solve. We work with everyone in the hospital to do so, and we just figure out ways in which to pool resources and vantage points by addressing a problem that disproportionately affects groups of people due to the intersectionality of their identities in doing so.
So one of the things that I constantly hear from you guys is this idea of changing language and adapting to that change in language. So this question really comes from the background of a lot of times you can dismantle a system or dismantle a principle by confusing the language and confusing the communication. And we've seen that across history where you take somebody's communication, take somebody's language, and that's how you dismantle what their goal is. So can you touch on, like, from leadership, how do you balance playing the game, essentially, like you need an income, versus playing into that role of dismantling a language so that there is confusion when you are trying to create these collaborations with people, because I don't know what principal direction of communication is or whatever, like, versus DEI, like you're dismantling.
So it might push back. It feels like it's pushing back on this concept of change. So there's a good book on, oh gosh, the name of the book evades me, but it's a book on change, and it's more almost like a self-help book than anything. But what it does is it tells you to think back about how much you've changed in your life over your lifetime. And you'll say that you're not the same person 5-10 years ago. And there's all these different things about you that has changed. Yeah, if I ask you the same question, how are you going to be different in 5 or 10 years? It's a lot harder to answer that. And I think that is, I'm just from personal experience, that is a mental trap that even I have about thinking, okay, like we've come all this long way, and then nothing can change. Like, that's how I approach it. And then that also creates a mental block for me too. So it's not that not all change is good. And so it's not that it's not a problem, but I really try to see myself and saying, okay, what will this look like in a really productive way kind of going forward? And it's hard to imagine. It's not clear. That's why I'm advocating for shared language, because I think even if the language is different, we still need something, right? But I don't know that like DEI, that really wasn't used more than 10, 15 years ago. And so we got to change again. But like, the concepts have never changed. The problems have always been there. But like, DEI was a 10, 15-year fad as a term, as words. We just got to find our next ones so that we can keep telling the same story under different words. That's I don't know if that answers your question. It's a little bit hard.
But I would just add the words diversity, if you actually don't think about it as DEI, but diversity, equity, and inclusion are strong moral principles that everyone should be on board with. And the craziness of somehow making that illegal should be mind-blowing to everybody, right? And those aren't new words. Yeah. Those aren't new concepts. Ideas of justice and doing the right thing should not be freaking illegal, right? And so that, I think, underscores. And so I would say, although we can't legally put stuff on our policies and our grants and whatever else, all the time, do I do something and say, well, this is kind of DEI? Unless you don't want to do that because you know you have a DEI opponent and you're like, well, we're not going to, take our feet out from under us in this because that's not our goal in this moment. But I think whoever was doing Jedi mind tricks, that's what you have to do. And Jedi, by the way, we'll keep that term too. But, it's it's not an easy thing, but I think the work to make the language of the future still exist and allow us to communicate is ongoing and in process, and that's okay. So,
I think what I would add briefly is I think you've seen a lot of the language change in the roles that people have identified themselves as. You know, D, E, and I are sort of ideas, and a lot of the language that we've changed to are more behavior or outcome-based words, right? And so it's a lot harder to say, okay, you can't say the word advocacy or something like that because it's behavior-based, there's potential outcomes with that. And so maybe the language change that we're moving toward is less away from those ideas and more towards words that are actionable and things that we can actually measure the outcome and the impact with.
Sorry, I'm going to speak twice on this one, just because it's a little funny. So my title is, Assistant Dean of Multicultural Affairs, and when I tell people that, they're like, "Oh, that's like an old school term," and it just never changed. And so it's been around a long time, and I actually like it. And I don't know, it'll get attacked, but my title hasn't changed because it wasn't DE and I. But I think this idea of like that we all have culture, I think is a really important kind of thing to talk about. And we all have multiple cultures and different backgrounds, just like the introduction that you facilitated, Sheree. So that's another opportunity, I think, for us to really try to not lose sight of kind of what we're after.
And I think we create a new language each time we're together in these like networks. So, for example, when someone says social justice, I'm like, I know, I got you, right? Or they say engagement, it's like, no problem. So, you start creating this new language that within our groups are still as powerful as they were before, because we're still doing that same work, even if we have to rebrand it or just kind of put a different lens on top of it. But the biggest fear would be actually letting that be actually a stopping gap to actually doing the work. And that's what we've seen is, okay, I've lost my title or I've had to change it and things, and then people just stop doing the work. And that is actually even more damaging than actually just being creative as we are in emergency medicine as a specialty, to actually be creative on how can we help our patients. Our next is actually just touching base on like kind of measuring impact, because I think that is sometimes the hardest thing is, we could be running fast forward and trying to do something. We have all these different, hurdles and barriers that are moving forward that sometimes it can feel like we're like treading in mud instead. So I'm just curious, like, how have you been able to kind of define like what a meaningful difference is and, how you've actually been able to kind of move that mark?
I mean, mine's very specific to medical education. That's where my sphere is. But, in education, there's sort of different, like Miller's pyramid of assessment. There's the idea of knowledge, skills, and attitudes, right, for learners. And I think what we've seen with a lot of DEI initiatives is that it's very hard to change mindsets and attitudes around things, right? But when we incorporate some of these concepts, we can measure the outcomes of those educational interventions in patient care and the way that they sort of interact and do their job. So a lot of my sort of switch has been toward, are our residents implementing some of these practices in their simulation? Are they doing it in the clinical environment? And how can I assess that? How can I measure those principles in a way that shows that they're putting those ideas into actions, because I'm not necessarily going to change their mindset about those principles.
I think one of the ways that I would measure this change is it's very qualitative, but it's a cultural change. To what extent, and I think this also pertains to more so our learners, residents, and medical students, but to what extent can you show up as your authentic self in the emergency department or to conference? And what does that mean? Because I think that, particularly when you come from marginalized groups, we're always, we're wearing this mask so that we can fit in and so that we can, or not even necessarily fit in, but so at least that you can kind of minimize, what harm you may experience in any given shift or in any given day. So the extent to which, even as myself as an attending, that I can show up as my authentic self. And I think that, of course, as you move on through your training, you have a little bit more leeway. So I really try to lead by example. So I realize, that maybe my medical students and my residents may not have certain freedoms that I may. So that's kind of one of the things that I measure is to whom are you attempting to appeal, and how's that going to be accepted? How's that going to be reflected in your evaluation? evaluations and feedback, or how's that going to impact how you might interact with your patients. So I think that authenticity and knowing that you are going to be not only just received and or tolerated, but respected in your authenticity is a true marker of cultural change that the work that we do really seeks to impact. Of course, it's, I think, difficult to measure, but I think nonetheless it's an important qualitative measure that shows that everyone is not just feeling that they are accepted, but valued, appreciated, and respected.
Yeah, I would say I would take that a little bit to the larger community as well. Like, I think it's hard to measure some of these things. I think you can look at, one example is our residency has every single critical case is what we call it, but like some people do morbidity, mortality, whatever. Every resident presentation, case presentation includes a social determinants of health slide in it. And that is something that 10 years ago did not exist, right? And so it's becoming part of the culture. That is not something people judge as our DEI program, right? But it's there. The needle has moved. And I would also say just like larger society in Minnesota, a few people did the right thing, and I think it's probably one of the biggest pushbacks against the current governmental stuff that's going on, and it inspired people across the country, right? It wasn't an organized, academic plan that was just people showing up and doing the right thing. And I think at the end of the day, some of this you just measure in your heart. You don't measure with any metric.
Yeah, this stuff is hard because you need to some degree, show your impact to have a job. But I completely agree with what everyone said. And I used to come from this much more from a data perspective. But that data now is our risk. That data is what gets used against us. And so I like some of the comments that folks have said about you can do some data, like it's a little bit of a, they're not as common, but I think we can do a little bit more on belonging, for example, or feeling like you're part of a community. There are metrics for that, and so I really think the way in which we kind of reband or help focus sometimes it's well-being, but certainly the belonging space. I really think that that's an opportunity for us to kind of advance what is DEI work. That's the positive side. You can do positive. The one I think a lot about in the medical school side is some of the negative stuff. So really reducing the student mistreatment, for example. And so that's like a culture thing like that we shouldn't have. And so it's the combination of more positive things, less negative things, and hopefully that still justifies my job at the end of the day, because it is really hard. And I agree. I mean, how do I actually know? I know because somebody comes up to me and tells me something. Like that's how I know in my heart that I made a difference. And I have to prove to my dean a little bit more than that. So.
And this will be kind of our last question here is just, for our students, for our residents, for our junior faculty and faculty, like you are the emerging leaders in this, right? We need all of us in this room, and even those, especially those not in this room, to be invited to these conversations so that we can actually move the mark and actually see the changes that we want to see. And culture takes time to build, and also, and so we just have to be thoughtful and patient about that. But just, do you guys have advice for kind of our emerging leaders who have an interest in this field?
I think the best piece of advice that I got as a young resident going into becoming a faculty member was, first of all, just be a good doctor, all right? Establish your foundation as a clinician and to make sure that they know that you know what the heck you're talking about. And I think what that then gives you, it gives you that clout, that gives you that ability and that confidence within yourself to be able to articulate and talk and to talk about other things. Once you have done that, I think it's then important to figure out, well, what makes you get out of bed in the morning? What makes you interested to go to work every day? I understand that this DEI thing that we keep talking about is a very broad and big umbrella, and there's so many things under that. So find what your niche is and what your thing is that you enjoy. The way in which I got into thinking about health equity, or specifically the intersectionality of law enforcement patient care, just so happened to be that I was on shift one day and a law enforcement officer came up to me and asked, "Hey, give me a phone call when this patient gets discharged so I can come pick him up." And I remember thinking to myself, like, is that okay? Is that my job to do? And it just kind of set me down this spiral or this rabbit hole of just trying to figure out, well, where does my job begin and where does their job end? And so once you start to figure out what is important to you, then that will kind of send you off on your way. And again, you don't know when it's going to happen. I can't give you firm answers about where to look and how to look for it, but just keep your eyes open, and then your passions will kind of find you as well.
I think the first thing I was going to say was to, remain resilient. But just by very nature of you all making it this far in your career, you are resilient in ways that people probably wouldn't even begin to understand. So I think of greatest importance is to remember to extend yourself grace. You're not always going to get it right. You're going to have some difficult conversations, and you're going to meet people who simply don't support you or even the work that you do, no matter how positive and or impactful it is. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're on the wrong path. But I think that if you are not ruffling a few feathers on the way, then you're probably not doing anything that's all that meaningful and impactful. So as high achievers who are very hard on ourselves, extend yourself grace and make sure that you have a soft place to land when you're doing this difficult work.
Yeah, I think my advice would be to remember that sort of like competency in DEI is a lifelong journey. It's not a goal that you achieve. It's a constantly moving and developing process. And to that extent, I think, as somebody who, I guess I'm 5 years out from residency, when I was first starting to sort of engage in DEI and how I wanted to develop that in my career and my scholarship, I think what was really important for me was being in groups of people like this, being on the the committees in the different national organizations, to both learn from other people, but to also learn from the things that didn't go well for them, how they navigated these barriers, and remember that I might feel like I'm on an island in my institution, but I'm not an island in this community, right? And so Sri always says this is relational work, and I 100% agree with that. And finding those people to engage with, to be your mentors, and sort of continue that sort of group conversation, I think is vitally important.
It's harder to come up with something new as all the good wisdom comes down. Yeah, good luck. My hot take is to say yes to things. And there's been a lot of talk about how to say no in the well-being space. But you do have to say yes to things that are intentionally aligned with where you want to go and what you want to do. So be intentional about it, but you're here right now. You showed up to an 8 a.m. early conference thing, right? So you said yes to this, so you've already done that, and maybe I don't need to tell the folks in this room. But do those things and keep doing those things. Be intentional about the ones that you go to. There's a dozen other sessions, and you pick this one. So make sure that you're intentional about it. I would say be reliable and really kind of engage in the work that you do. I think it's easy to sort of show up for a day or for a meeting or something, but really get some time to get a little bit of depth, right? We're such a breadth specialty, but these academic pursuits are opportunities for you to go a little bit deeper. And so when you get involved with something, really make sure that you get something meaningful out of it. And then the third is a little bit along the times of the concept of resiliency and just understanding that change is really slow. And that is, I think, one of the challenges in emergency medicine, that mind shift when we go into these spaces. We've got 8 hours to fix everything, and we got to get out. That's not how any of these problems work. And so just recognizing that these things take really long time, and find a way to be well for yourself in that, knowing that change isn't going to happen that quickly, but that progress will be made.
All right, I get to come up with something after all those brilliant pearls of advice, but I would say stay curious is probably the thing that I advise every person I mentor, and whatever speaks to your curiosity is what you should follow. For me, I'm curious about people's stories, and I think that serves you well. So I would say stay curious, and particularly stay curious about people's stories. And lastly, as peers, you, even if you're very early in your career, can be mentors to each other, and that's critical in this space because there aren't people that are so much, like we're up here on this panel, but we're not so much more knowledgeable in this space than you are. And your ability to inspire each other is huge. A small statement of affirmation to your peer may not make a difference in your career, but it may be the thing that propels them forward, and they make a huge difference that you benefit from. So supporting each other is huge. So.
Awesome. I just want to thank our panelists. I'm going to plant a seed for all of you in the audience that we'll do a closing reflection later on, but just kind of thinking about how you're going to join the conversation and kind of advance this work. So just planting a seed that we can kind of bear fruit later on. But just thanks to our panelists. I would just say, like, you guys, you always inspire me. And on the times that are hard, I always remember kind of the work that we're able to do together. And so just know that your work is meaningful and definitely impactful in my life. We'll take a couple minutes, just a coffee break. So if you guys want to hit the bathroom, we have coffee outside, and then we'll come back at 9:30 to kind of jump back in. Hey, how are you?
You're able to, honestly, whatever you have up is probably fine. I sent you one that had the revised slide title. I was like, this is fine. This works.
I think it's probably right. Yeah, it works. Okay.
Change nothing about the title in like a word.
Yeah. Good. It's going good. How's your other session?
Oh, it's good. It was great. It's just about the e-lead session.
Okay.
This is our like last block. It's like a year-long thing, which is really cool. It's just like the timing is just at the same time. All of these pre-workshops are like at the same time.
Yeah, it really is. So that's what, and even like I helped with the education summit, but then we have our ABA and stuff at the same time. So it's like, I was like, okay, let me just learn how to run around two different things. Yeah. Luckily we're adaptable, so we can do that.
So this one doesn't have the updated title.
I know, I saw it. That's fine. It's literally just the title. Everything else is the same. There's maybe like, remember the editing was a little weird
Yeah,
for one
on the
side?
one side,
I fixed
yeah.
it, but it's fine. It was fine then, it'll be fine now. It's the same
Okay.
topic.
Why is this disclosure side?
Uh-oh. Let's just jump through a couple real quick. Okay, I don't really know why that's there. What is that? Oh, okay. I think it's just disclosures for the whole group.
Yeah, it seems like an error.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe a mandatory.
Okay, that's weird.
Yeah, what? I don't know how that one slide. You know what I bet is maybe SAEM put that in because this is probably the one that either you or I uploaded, and then I suspect SAEM grabbed it, put that in. I mean, just by the fact that Sri said that she didn't upload these were just in the system. So, and I think both you and I uploaded one version, right? Because when we do our whatever yeah. So that's what I suspect. Unless you snuck it in there. Thanks.
No, I did not. No. No, I definitely did not.
I'm gonna just drop my papers here.
Yeah, I probably should have printed my notes, but
You know, I think it'll be fine. This is like there for me to try to remember. But
yeah, I mean, low pressure.
yeah.
Yeah, let's use that. I'm a little the real title is not uploaded, but I think so. There's like a formatting down there. We'll be fine. It's all good. Low pressure. Yeah. Low pressure.
It's so funny. I laugh about that.
Yeah. We're going until when? 10:30? 10?
10. Yeah.
All right.
All right. Which way is which? Adam, do you want to drive?
Yeah, I can start. All right. Well, good morning again. We're going to move on to our next talk here. So once again, I'm Adam. I'm one of the APDs at University Hospitals.
Good morning, everybody. Manuel Montaño. I'm one of the associate program directors at Denver Health.
And so this talk actually ties in really well to what some of the panelists were talking about in terms of the fact that, you know, the phrase DEI and that framework that we've been using has sort of changed over the last decade and a half. And so some of the things we're going to be talking about in this presentation are ways that we can reframe, restructure the ideas of what DEI looks like in our communities, in our educational communities, in our departments, to continue to push the principles of DEI forward, but using a potentially different framework. So we have no disclosures, for sure. And so the objectives, we're going to identify contemporary political and institutional challenges to DEI in medical education, evaluate some proven strategies that leaders have used to safeguard inclusive practices, and then personally formulate a personal steadfast mindset that affirms the commitment to sustaining inclusive culture despite external pressures.
All right, so the first thing to talk about is the political environment in the storm. We're all pretty aware. Over the last several years, there have been numerous changes, both nationally and ideologically, attacks and restrictions against the pillars of DEI and inclusivity frameworks. This storm, these roadblocks are multifaceted, and I suspect many of these elements here ring true to members of this audience. Legislation, restrictions, institutional pullback of opportunities, language scrutiny, policy and training setbacks, funding restrictions, impaired recruitment, fear-based decisions, etc. The question isn't whether inclusion matters. The question is, how do we redesign it so that it survives? Now, now that so much feels so tenuous, we have an important opportunity here to consider what happened and how we got here. When not too long ago there was pretty significant momentum for this cause, the unfortunate truth now laid bare is that the old model of DEI was vulnerable. Many outwardly facing DEI efforts previously focused on significant workshops, awareness campaigns, symbolic gestures. Virtue signaling was an expectation. All too frequently, these initiatives and programs were not embedded in the systems that we operate in. They weren't measurable with tangible outcomes. And what's more, much of the framework depended on specific training and on heavy investment from a limited few rather than the whole coalition.
And so the way that we had been thinking about DEI with the recent political changes showed that the model that we were using and thinking about was pretty fragile. DEI was often thought about by people that opposed the principles as lifting up other groups means closing the doors on others, and the way that we structured a lot of our DEI work made it vulnerable for targeting and elimination. So DEI programs often were programmatic rather than structural, so that's sort of like your one-off microaggression training rather than being sort of incorporated into a longitudinal curriculum. Located in specialized offices that have the names that people were looking out for rather than being incorporated into institutions and departments. Symbolically visible but structurally limited, so having a mission statement but not a program of assessment to evaluate the way that that mission statement is integrated into a residency program or department. Framed as values work rather than mission critical work, and we talked about this in the panel, right? Saying that this is something that we should all value versus this is vital to our performance as emergency medicine physicians. And then administratively or financially discretionary, having a separate pot of money specifically designated for DEI efforts, easy to target, easy to find. A separate office, again, easy to target and easy to find. And so, when you think about your own institutions over the past couple years, I think reflecting on that idea in programs that have been challenged and eliminated can try to help us understand a little bit more how we can move forward. We, like many other institutions, had a clerkship for medical students that was specific for those from underrepresented identities. It was labeled separately than our normal process, easy to target. It was funded differently than our normal clerkships, easy to target, right? So the way that we had to change and we had to overcome those barriers was to incorporate personal statements that talk about your background and your identity for all applicants to our program to make it incorporated into that program rather than a separate entity that was easy to target and easy to eliminate.
Now, let's take this opportunity and reimagine this work, not just react to what's happened. Across higher education, medicine, scientific research, recent scholarship has suggested that the challenge is not simply how to defend the principles of mission DEI, but how to evolve it for a new sociopolitical reality. How do we redesign this equity work so that it cannot be easily dismantled? The first step is make it legally grounded, make it embedded in existing civil rights and local regulatory frameworks. Second, operationally embed this, integrate it into our core systems, integrate it into hiring, into promotion, into education, and into outcomes. Make it outcomes justified. The framework needs to be observable, measurable, and have accessible outcomes. We need to develop a metric of assessment, and we need to find a roadmap to meeting and exceeding those outcomes. Let's make it collectively defended, which means supported by and participation from the entire coalition and our supporting institutions. The burden cannot just fall on the few. Let's make it epistemically persistent. This means research, scholarship, and the quest for scientific inquiry and advancement has to continue. The last part is make it relationally sustained. This is where our communities must maintain the work even under pressure, such as when structures and resources retract. Now, this is certainly the toughest one in the current political climate, but we have to be steadfast and deliberate against these roadblocks. We want to introduce an emerging framework into this discussion, which is the FAIR framework. It's proposed by Lily Cheng, who is an author and consultant in the inclusion and equity space. The FAIR framework is a reimagining of the principles of inclusion to evolve it to an outcomes-based framework. This is evolution. This is not abandonment of values. The key driving goal here is implementing measurable change as opposed to building awareness. What this next evolution of DEI could look like, make it outcomes-based, focused on measurable and equitable. What can we measure and what goals can we set? How do we succeed in achieving these goals? Rather than insisting that our programs be committed to progress, let's ask how we've measured them and how do we achieve this progress. Let's make it systems focused. How does the system incentivize, promote, and recognize inclusive behavior in leaders? Rather than merely ask or insist that members align with an ideological goal, let's normalize and reinforce inclusive behavior. Make it coalition-based. This means engaging everyone, so nobody feels disenfranchised. If everyone is involved in solution building, then the results also ultimately make the workplace better for everyone. Everyone can share in the supporting success. And by doing this, you will be able to still help the experiences of otherwise marginalized groups. Make it win-win. The idea here is setting goals that benefit progress for everyone and communicating that win effectively, changing the notion that opening the doors for some is inherently restricting access to others. FAIR is an attempt to create a framework that meets these needs. It improves systems, it doesn't fix individuals, it builds coalitions across roles and identities, it communicates benefits for everyone, and it creates durable, measurable change. Now let's take a moment to explore these 4 ideas. First is fairness. Fairness is when all people are set up for success and protected against discrimination. The system is set up for equity for everyone by integrating policies, practices, and prevention of bias to maintain accountability for everyone so that everyone has the same high standard of experience. We can measure this by assessing perception. If an issue or bias is found, the system gets reevaluated rather than individuals, so policies, processes, and practice environments are more fair for everyone. The idea here is improving systems rather than changing any individual's behavior. For access. Access is when all people can fully participate in a given experience. It requires removing barriers to participation and redesigning experiences and environments that work for everyone. Think of a residency bonding activity that might occur, let's say, only in the evenings and may focus on alcohol. Well, parents of young children, residents who do not participate in alcohol, these folks might feel excluded from accessing these activities and from bonding from their residency class and coworkers. The idea of a good fit in this framework, for example, is the disenfranchising antithesis to access. You can measure access by looking at people's participation and engagement, look at their attendance, utilization, et cetera. Addressing access issues involves rethinking the process and goals rather than creating case-specific solutions. Inclusion is when all people feel respected, valued, and safe for who they are. It's engaging thoughtfully with what makes people different and including deliberate system elements that allow people with these different lived experiences to feel valued and respected. For example, if your environment is physically and psychologically safe to share critical ideas, feedback, experience productive conflict, and take risks for faculty and residents of all genders, then you have adequate gender inclusion. To measure inclusion, we can use surveys to assess people's perception and experiences. And if obstructions to inclusion are found, we can investigate the system to see what changes we can work to make the environment suitable for everyone. Representation. Representation is when all people feel their needs are advocated for by those who represent them. It's not just as simple as demographic box checking. Representation requires participation in decision-making process, frequent and transparent communications between leaders and key partners, and high trust in the leadership from many different groups that they represent. Measuring representation entails looking at surveying people on their perceptions and leadership and their trust in issues that are being discussed and advocated for. I want to emphasize that in this framework, representation is a matter of trust. While common identity aids in building trust, even more important to building that trust is the behavior and track record of those in power, considering the needs of their given constituent. Focusing on representation as an issue of trust, rather than an issue of identity alone, allows for a productive conversation that doesn't fix any more on just demographics and improves everyone's experience in the process. Let's consider, what is the outcome we're trying to shape? What is the system that had produced the current state? How do we redesign it in a way that benefits everyone, not just a subset? Fairness, we look at, are the outcomes equitable and just? For access, who can meaningfully participate and benefit? For inclusion, whose voices shape the decisions of day-to-day experiences? And for representation, who is present in visible, influential roles?
And so, like Manny mentioned, this framework is an attempt to build coalitions with people that are resistant to DEI principles. The idea is that by incorporating these values, these FAIR values, across cultural groups, we are uplifting everybody that's participating in our system, in our institution, rather than focusing specifically on particular identity groups. And so we are doing this in a way to have everybody buy in to the thought process by using outcomes-based focuses, like Manny mentioned, using systems-focused designs, and again, communicating that a rising tide lifts all ships, right? That we're in this together, that these principles that we can talk about, that we can implement, that we can engage in, help people from every identity group, regardless of their background or where they come from. And so some applications of this are pretty broad. So when we think about residency recruitment, right, there's a lot of ways that bias and inequity come up in the way that we recruit people to both medical school and residency, right? So, we can use structured interview rubrics that have specific scoring based on the answers to values-based questions, right? This ensures equity for all applicants across the board, right? And is a positive way to enforce equity for all applicants rather than just focusing specifically on the diversity part of the application process. Using standardized scoring systems, using bias interruption pauses, so having somebody on the faculty that is sitting there during your conversations about applicants and saying, hey, you know what, I think like this person we're doing a little bit of like me bias, or that sort of idea, the thing that we're talking about with, her hair seemed a little bit off, right? That's a bias against that person in their application, and having somebody call that out specifically. Having broad faculty representation on your interview recruitment process, right? If everybody that's interviewing the applicants is an older white man who trained in a different time, right, that's going to influence the ability to sort of assess those applicants appropriately based on identity. And then demographic outcomes review, taking a look at the data, seeing who was recruited to your program, who was in your top 100, and who wasn't, and are there any trends there that we can intervene on. Thinking about residency and faculty education, really focusing the idea as education is quality improvement. We know that patients who speak English as a second language have higher rates of bounce back to the emergency department, and for some disease processes have poorer outcomes, right? That's a systems operational based assessment that can be incorporated into, this is just emergency medicine, right? This is not a DEI principle. This is just how we practice and how we can improve outcomes for this particular patient population. Longitudinal incorporation of DEI principles, I think I mentioned this in the panel, right? Not having separate sort of DEI days, right? But understanding how those principles can fit into the education longitudinally for both our faculty and our residents. Providing opportunities for peer learning. There's some research to suggest that when people are engaged in conversations with their peers of different backgrounds, that has the potential to change mindsets, right? So are we having opportunities for people to have organic discussions that include their experiences and their perspectives to potentially try to change those mindsets? And then using structured bias mitigation strategies and assessment. We talked about a bias interrupter, right? But understanding the ways in which we assess learners, that we assess faculty, have inherent bias in them and how we can overcome that. Additionally, when you look at your curriculum, there's a lot of ways that we can incorporate these topics. Doing a diversity audit to understand what topics you are and are not teaching, and then how we can incorporate those things through a threaded curriculum model longitudinally. Doing DEI tracking and tagging, again, sort of understanding what are the topics that we're not doing well, what are the residents not implementing in their clinical practice that potentially need to be changed. Using continuous feedback loops that incorporate both needs assessments for faculty and residency on certain topics, right? And understanding, again, are those being implemented in clinical practice? Do residents feel like they're gaining anything from that particular experience? Or how can we change those educational processes? And then using simulation to understand how we're utilizing those mindsets in an assessment environment that moves from knowledge and attitudes to more of a skill-based assessment. Right. And then with promotion and advancement, having transparent criteria for what the promotion process actually looks like, right? So, how many publications do I need? How many committees do I need to serve on, right? And having clarity with that pathway and how to achieve that pathway, right? And supporting all junior faculty regardless of their background. Implementing an equity audit dashboard to understand who are the people that are being promoted, who are the people that are being mentored to reach that space, and are we seeing disparities in who those people are? And then sponsorship tracking, understanding and actually with an outcomes-based approach, understanding which faculty members and which group of people are being sponsored for committees, sponsored for leaderships, sponsored for research opportunities, and again, identifying are there disparities there.
We just went through a fair amount of information and ideas. Thank you all for being with us during this and taking this journey together. I hope you might take an opportunity now and take a little moment of active reflection. Let's think about the challenges we've discussed, the opportunities and some of the strategies moving forward, and hope everyone might take a moment to think about active reflection and create perhaps a small action task list or action statement to be able to bring back to your institutions now about how you will remain committed and steadfast to this work.
Yeah, and with our closing thought here, when under pressure, programs and organizations, they don't lose their values, but they lose what they haven't operationalized and incorporated into concrete structures, right? We've seen that with the things that have been eliminated and some of the concepts that we've talked about today. And so by thinking about how we can operationalize things, how we can incorporate principles that are applicable to all groups of people and all identities, helps us resist in times of significant political and institutional pressure. Thanks. Any questions at all? No? Okay, thanks.
Okay, we're going to move into like our lightning talks next. So we'll have, this is kind of a very quick session, but we have three wonderful speakers who'll be kind of jumping in and kind of teaching us about like creating a environment of belonging and inclusion. So there. Yeah, the back's working, yeah.
All right, bear with me. This is my first day using a computer, so hopefully this works. Okay. So I think we've all met now, but if there are any new faces, my name is Katrina Gibson, and I am faculty at Vanderbilt and immediate past president of ADIM. All right, so I'm going to speak with you all briefly about a seat at the table, mentorship, inclusion, and the future of emergency medicine. No disclosures. So I think that we can all probably attest to the fact that mentorship is important. Many of us would not be sitting here around these tables if it weren't for a faculty member who took some sort of interest in us, both personally and professionally. But specifically, studies show that mentorship matters for some more quantitative reasons as well. Studies show that it builds career satisfaction, scholarly productivity, research funding, and it builds a department's leadership capacity as well. So when junior faculty, residents, and faculty of all stages for that matter feel that that department is invested in their personal and professional growth, they're more likely to invest in that department and to give back. We're more likely to serve on hospital-wide committees. And of course, that reflects well on our department as well. If everyone from your emergency department is sitting on some sort of hospital-based committee that maybe sparks a little interest in our relative departments so that we can get funding and produce research. And these are the types of things that build prestige and make people want to come to your department. Now, I think we've talked about language in a lot of these DEI talks, but specifically, I feel like we use terms like mentor and advocate interchangeably, but I think that they actually function as different roles. So in order for us to have an educated conversation, I want to make sure that we're all speaking the same language. So what is a mentor? Now, a mentor might say, based on what I've seen over the years about you, I think you should consider doing X. So in these types of relationships, it's usually kind of more of a hierarchical relationship. You expect your mentor to tell you what to do and to kind of push you along in certain pathways. And usually that person has more experience specifically in that field of interest, and you want to maybe follow in their footsteps to a certain extent. But what about a coach? Now, a coach might say, which of your strengths will help you in overcoming this challenge? These relationships can be a little bit more egalitarian. They may not tell you what to do, but we're focusing on self-reflection. We're thinking a little bit about, what am I good at? What sparks my curiosity? And what should I do to continue to move in this direction? So your coach, they may not even necessarily be another emergency medicine doctor, or maybe they're not even a physician at all, but they're just somebody that makes moves in life that, in a way that maybe you respect, and they have a skill set that you think that you could apply to your professional development. Now let's talk about sponsorship. Now, I put a star by that because I think this is the really high quality, high impact type of mentorship that we really need. So your sponsor might say, there's an opportunity to lead this committee, and I can mention your name if you are interested. So this is that faculty member's like, hey, I was asked to do this talk. I'm too busy. Do you want to do it? And you say yes, because that goes on your resume. It puts your name out there, and it helps build these types of relationships and people are speaking your names in rooms that maybe you didn't even have access to. They're making sure that they're opening doors so that you can not only walk through them, but reach back and bring residents, medical students through those doors as well. So what about roles and responsibilities? I think that any successful and impactful relationship, whether it's personal or professional, you need to define, what it is that your expectations are. So we're not just, necessarily going off on vibes. All right. Are we meeting quarterly? Are we meeting twice? Are we meeting twice a year? What do I expect you to have prepared when we come and sit in this meeting? Did you update your resume? Did you list what type of talks that you gave? Or, are you studying for your boards? How many hours a week? These are concrete things that really help frame these types of relationships. So your goals and expectations, and I think that this is particularly important as you are transitioning from maybe being a fellow into junior faculty. It's like, what now? I kind of belabor this, but what's your North Star? What's your legacy? What do you want your career to look like at your institution? What next? We talk about the power of no. I mean, it's particularly early in your career, you feel like you need to say yes to everything because, if I turn it down, they're going to think I'm not interested. They'll never think of me again, and I won't have any opportunities. But you need to start thinking about what promotion track am I going to go up? Am I a researcher? That tends to be a little bit more self-explanatory, but am I an educator, and am I going up under service? And what opportunities make sense for me to say yes to? Because you're not here to be anybody's workhorse. You need to do things that have intrinsic value, but also serve your greater purpose as well. And also with whom. And we talked about this before. This is whether it's just in emergency medicine or the DEI in general, this is a very collaborative field. So don't feel like you are siloed into only working with other, emergency medicine physicians. Maybe there's someone in, the surgery or trauma space that's serving the populations and the goals that you're interested in. Make sure that you are put in touch with them and an introduction is made so that you can continue to do impactful work. We talked about goals and expectations. Structured mentorship is what matters. Sometimes that may look like just grabbing some coffee with someone who you really like and whose career you want to mimic, but make sure that you're holding each other accountable. When you're meeting, why you're meeting, and what's expected of everyone when you show up at said meeting. And also remember, expect the unexpected. I talked about making sure that we are extending yourselves grace. Life happens. So, maybe you're having health issues or you're taking care of a sick family member. Make sure that your mentorship framework takes all of those things into consideration because your mental health is paramount as well. Now let's talk about mentorship gaps, right? The purpose of mentorship is not just for professional development, but this is one of the many things that really ingrains in this kind of a sense of belonging. And I included this slide because a study from the University of Michigan says that academic women EM physicians report lower rates, 36.2% versus 47.5% of formal mentorship than men. And this study takes it a little step farther. And again, in addition to these mentorship gaps, we tend to miss out on that really high impact mentorship, which is that sponsorship. Put me on, right? Like put me in the game, right? What are the opportunities that I may have not had access to that your mentors and your coaches do? So even when there are these structured mentorships, maybe you join the department as junior faculty, but maybe if you are a woman, you're less likely to have your name spoken in those rooms that are full of opportunities, and that's something that we all need to be mindful of. And let's talk about intersectionality. And I use and define that term in the manner that was kind of defined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw. We're more than just our race or our gender. We are our religion, our citizenship, our sexual orientation, and even our socioeconomic status. This impacts not only who we are and how we move through the world, but it also can impact how we mentor other folks and who are more likely to mentor. So take that into consideration. Are you only mentoring people who look like you? And if you are, maybe there's nothing wrong with that, but just take that into consideration and make sure that you are kind of spreading your gifts and talents, or that you're also seeking mentorship opportunities elsewhere. Now, how can mentorship or sponsorship or coaching lead to belonging and inclusion? Now, of course, I'm speaking to the choir here, but so many studies show, and particularly that if you come from a background that is underrepresented in medicine, you're more likely to feel like you're not included and or incorporated into the professional environment and the learning environment. And of course, this has implications how whether or not you're promoted, whether or not you feel seen, and it can also impact your productivity in patient care. So let's focus on the roles of mentors. I know that even if you are a medical student or a resident, you're still capable of being mentors. We talked about peer mentorship. So in order to combat some of these things, what is your role as a mentor? So make sure you communicate to avoid implicit bias with non-concordant mentees. So maybe your mentee doesn't look like you. I can remember, I was talking to one of my mentees, like, Katrina, or one of my mentors rather. He said, Katrina, you're going to really enjoy working at the VA, and you're going to love it. Now, I do enjoy working at the VA, but of course, the patients that we take care of tend to be older white men, right? And the conversation continued, and we're chuckling about something, and then I said, you know what? We'll call him. We'll call him Andrew, right? I said, Andrew, do you really think that the vets interact with me in the same way that they interact with you? And he had to stop a minute, and he's like, oh, no, you're right. And I'm like, I'm sweetie, honey, and all this sort of stuff. And they mean well, but we just have different interactions. So you need to, so I think that both mentors and mentees need to stop and have these little breaks where we check our implicit biases. They're not necessarily bad, but we need to understand that these things exist. And you need to make sure that you are comfortable having these types of conversations. So identify your blind spots. And don't be afraid as a mentor to phone a friend. We cannot be all things to every people. I'm not every woman like Whitney Houston, I'm sorry. So you need to say, listen, this is a problem or experience that you may have, but I can't help you in. But I have a friend who's in this department, or I work with such and such through this organization, and I think that you all would have these unique experiences in which they can guide you through that. Now let's talk about our roles as mentees. So what should you do? We talked about developing peer mentorship groups. We all are kind of navigating this terrain together. So maybe just because someone has been in the field for 20 years, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're more of an expert in something than maybe one of your peers that's been in it for 2 years. And this can also be really helpful when you are in departments where there's not that much diversity. So lean on your peers, because maybe they have access to mentors that you don't, that can really help you and share that sort of advice. Join your professional organizations. Say less, we're all here. I think that I know I speak from personal experience when I say that a lot of my professional development has come from opportunities through SAEM or NMA or whatever organization really speaks to you. Don't be afraid to look outside of your institution and really rely on those organizations, because when you do go up for a promotion, these are the folks that are going to be writing your letters and speaking to the work and all of the amazing things that you do. And also identify a faculty advocate. Some institutions, might have that built-in network. Others may not. Make sure that you choose maybe one person who's going to be your mentor, somebody's going to be your coach, or maybe, you're lucky enough where you find someone who all three are in the same. But make sure you find somebody who is going to look out for you, who's going to put you in the game, and who's going to put you on to the opportunities that lead to both personal and professional success. And now I talked about, disconcordance between folks who are in mentorship relationships. However, studies do show that there isn't any less satisfaction in the mentorship relationship when there is that discordance. Because let's be honest, not everyone's going to have someone who has a similar background with them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that relationship can't be equally supportive and or impactful. So moving forward over the next couple of days, because I'm sure you're going to be running into a lot of these people, think about who's going to be your mentor, who's going to tell you, this is what you should do. Maybe that's hierarchical. Who's going to be your coach? Who's going to help you, kind of self-reflect and put you in the game? And who's going to be your sponsor? Who's going to put you on? And those are my references. A lot of this was taken from a talk that we did at SAEM last year. So if you want to read our paper, you can go ahead and do that. The references are from that. And that's all I got. Thank you.
All right, well, good morning again, everybody. I think we've agreed on a lot of different things today. Can we agree on one other thing, that it is cold in here to y'all? Golly. Is that what it is? Okay, maybe I gotta go sit on the outside. We can just huddle together or something, because golly, it's cold. One of the things I also appreciate about these kind of days is that there is a lot of spatial repetition. You're going to hear a lot of things over and over again. And so not to be repetitive, but more so to kind of drive home the point. But we will talk about a lot of different, a lot of the same things over and over again. So again, my name is Ken Kennedy, faculty over at Duke, and definitely an honor to be here with you all, and thankful for the opportunity. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about amplifying voices in the context of building allyship into everyday practice. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about is in the context of URIM, but this can be broadened out to other demographic groups as well. So as we start to think about some of the objectives that we're going to have today, one, I want to make sure that we understand what the urgency is. Why is any of this stuff even important in the first place? We're going to then talk a little bit more about what microaggressions look like, define what it is, understand the different components of it. We'll ultimately kind of think about, well, then what's the next step? How do we then intervene? How do we then make sure that we are being advocates and thoughtful about our colleagues? And then ultimately, what is then our influence? How can we then elevate those individuals and be sponsors and mentors and things of that nature here as well? I have no financial disclosures, but let's think a little bit about the urgency of the moment itself. So as we look at it, we see that 60% of underrepresented in medicine physicians report experiencing some type of workplace discrimination. We also find that another, of those individuals, our URIM colleagues are 2 times more likely to experience some type of microaggression as they go throughout their day. And that is in context of comparing it to some of our non-URIM colleagues here. What we also find, though, that as we go along the pipeline from medical student up until the point where URIM faculty become faculty members, there is a precipitous drop-off at every level along that pipeline. And I guess the question then becomes well, why? Part of that reason is because there is a constant and repetitive exposure to sometimes hostile working environments that ultimately will cause people to say, you know what, I'm just done and I'm fed up with it and I don't want to deal with it anymore. This has become increasingly more of an issue in this political environment that we're currently in now, understanding that people are a little bit more reckless with their mouths, especially when it comes in the context of patients, and then sometimes even our colleagues as well. So we have to be very thoughtful about that. So what exactly is a microaggression? Microaggressions can be defined as something that is commonplace. It's a brief, commonplace indignity that communicates some type of negative message to marginalized people. And I want to make sure that I'm being thoughtful and recognizing that the key word here is commonplace. These aren't things that are exceptional, something that happens every now and then, but this is a constant, repeated thing that happens day in and day out, and ultimately is a common thing in our everyday lives. There are 3 different types of microaggressions when we think about it. We have micro insults, micro invalidations, and micro assaults. Micro insults are things that are more just rude. Sometimes it's just unintentional, kind of happens on a day-to-day basis. Micro invalidations are where you kind of erase someone's experience or who they are, what their identity is. We also think about micro assault specifically being the most overt and something that is a deliberate discrimination. I had an issue, maybe not an issue, it was a situation the other day. I was walking into a patient's room, and I walk in, do my thing and, speak and introduce myself. And the first thing that comes out of the patient's family member's mouth is that, oh, look at this good-looking man, and oh, he's so articulate. So I didn't know if I should be either insulted or or be a little bit flattered. But the fact that I had to be told that I was articulate kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I know I am. I got to where I am for a reason, and I don't necessarily need that affirmation that I am articulate. And so when we think about some of our URIM colleagues, we recognize that these microaggressions and these micro invalidations occur on a day in, day out basis. And sometimes, again, it gets to be a bit much when you're dealing with it not only from the context of a patient perspective, but then also potentially from a colleague perspective here as well. So what can we do as individuals in the moment when we recognize something that is happening and that person that is experiencing this is a bit uncomfortable? Well, we have this thing called the 4Ds framework that was developed in the context of bystander intervention and ultimately has been translated to also include medical education here as well. But the first D is direct. This is the most confrontational portion of it. This is you naming what is happening. This is you having the courage to intervene for someone in the moment and making sure that you are being very thoughtful about it. This could be, even saying to the person that is participating in offering that aggression and saying, hey, I don't necessarily think that landed in the way that you wanted it to. And again, like I said, it's a very direct and confrontational way of looking at things. The second is distract. This can be useful, especially if you are a trainee, junior faculty member, something that allows you to kind of go in and say, put a little bit of a disruption into the conversation. Hey, Shri, I need you to come over and talk with me for a second, and just take the person out of the game. The third one is delegate, more so trying to give that responsibility to someone else. And I want to make sure I frame it in the context of understanding that this is not you passing the buck. This is not you giving it to somebody else to deal with because you are so uncomfortable in dealing with it. But it is more so using all the tools in your toolbox. There are times when, again, you may not have the confidence or the cachet or whatever it may be to be able to disrupt that situation in the moment, but you do know someone who is a bit more senior that does have that cachet and that responsibility, and so allowing that person to ultimately kind of help with that. And then the last is thinking about delay. Ultimately, not everybody is going to be able to operate in the moment, but you can come back later on and say, hey, I recognize something that happened a little bit earlier, so I want to just come in and check in with you and make sure that you're doing okay. Even if it's not in the moment, I think having that ability to come back later on can be important. When we think about ways in which we look at things from like an individual standpoint, I think it's also important to look at it from a structural and a community and cultural standpoint here as well. And so this kind of goes back to some of the things that Katrina talked about a bit earlier, in this idea of, well, we all have responsibility in kind of helping to create this culture. So for the faculty members, one of the things that we have to do is make sure that we're amplifying in the room. When we have situations where someone is being talked over or their ideas are not being elaborated on or even just blatantly ignored, it is our responsibility to say, hey, well, XYZ made a really good point. Let's come back to this point that they made and make sure that we amplify that in the room. This goes back to the idea of sponsorship as well. You have an opportunity when your colleagues are doing great work, but they're not necessarily getting the recognition that they deserve. Make sure you open that door for them, and especially if you have the opportunity to do so. And I think the third thing to that is also understanding your own patterns as well. Are you only amplifying voices of the same people over and over again? Are you not comfortable talking to someone else or about someone else? Make sure that you understand who you are and why you are doing some of the things that you are doing. For the trainees, students, you all have the same opportunities here as well. Amplify in conference. You see that another medical student and or another resident is a little bit shy about talking because of whatever situation, or they do make a comment and we just pass over it, hey, just say the same thing. Go back. Let's talk about what this person mentioned. Make sure that we're being thoughtful about creating spaces, and then also you have the power to make sure that leadership is accountable for all of these things here as well. The last couple things that we'll talk about here is active allyship versus performative allyship. And I think a lot of times we see a lot of active allyship, right? We're posting to social media, we are saying, you know, words like "I don't see color" or whatever it may be, and these things, I guess, can have a place. They don't do nothing. Excuse my double negatives, but at the same time, when you are only doing performative allyship, it starts to lose its flavor. It starts to lose its steam, and as a matter of fact, I think it erodes the trust that people may have in you if all you're doing is just talking. You have to make sure that you're doing the active part of it here as well, making sure that you are doing those 4 Ds, the active allyship, using your cachet, your own clout to make sure that you are promoting other people. So being thoughtful about not just being performative in what we do, but being active in how we approach things here as well. So rather than kind of leaving you all with a summary of all the things that we talked about, I want you to try to do much more of a commitment more than anything else, right? So this week we are together, we can hang out, and it's a nice, safe space, but eventually we're going to have to end up going back to our own institutions where things may not be so safe or may be a bit more scary. So I'm going to challenge you in this time frame. Pick one of the 3 things that's on the screen here, right? If you have an opportunity, amplify someone else's work that they're doing. Pick something that they're doing that you think is being overlooked, and just make sure that you are promoting those things. Or if the opportunity presents itself, intervene. Use one of the 4 Ds that we talked about a little bit earlier to make sure that you are being thoughtful about the ways in which others are being treated and or mistreated for that matter. And then lastly, if there's an opportunity that presents itself where you can sponsor someone else, put them in places where they haven't been yet, speak their names in rooms that they haven't been in quite yet, do it. Again, this is the time where we are trying to create that community and to make sure that all of our colleagues are in a space where they can feel like their voices matter here as well. So these are my citations, and that's all I got for y'all today.
All right, so this is the last time you'll hear my voice today. We're going to discuss how we can create inclusive environments and promote retention across the spectrum of the physicians that we engage in both our educational and departmental environments. I have no disclosures. These are some of the objectives that we'll talk about today. It's no surprise to anybody in this room, it's not new information, that in order for our learners, our faculty, our colleagues to grow and thrive, we need to create an environment where everybody feels like they can, right? And there's different ways that we can do this, and there's different approaches that we need to take depending on the backgrounds of our learners, our faculty, our colleagues. But we need to be able to create that environment for everybody to reach their full potential and develop the way that everybody deserves in the framework of equity. I like to start this conversation with thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So this is a psychological theory that describes human motivation and behavior. And what it says is that as we progress from the bottom of the pyramid to reach our realization at the top and be able to engage in our full selves, we need to be overcoming these barriers at every level here. And so if our colleagues and our learners aren't meeting their physiological needs, like feeling safe where they are, right? If they're not meeting their pyramid level of like feeling love and belonging from their colleagues, from esteem, right? Feeling like they are important, that they are valuable, that they're welcome in that community, and that they're doing good work. They can't reach that top level of the pyramid, which is really developing that professional identity and pushing our faculty and colleagues to be successful in the environments that they're in. And so the framework that we'll use today is to talk through understanding individual challenges, addressing departmental level factors, and navigating institutional level efforts. So the idea of understanding individual level challenges is that we need to understand what our learners and faculty are experiencing based on their identity groups, and how our identity impacts our colleagues and our learners. Right? And thankfully, we have a lot of scholarship that's developed in the last decade in this space. Ken also cited this article, where we've looked at the different ways that physicians in emergency medicine, but also across the spectrum of medicine, have experienced their professional identity and their growth through that space in both positive and negative ways, and understanding the things that our learners experience and that they need in order to reach that top level of the hierarchy pyramid. And so what we need to understand is how racism affects our learners and our colleagues, right? We need to understand how microaggressions function and how we can overcome those, how both we are imparting those to the people that we are engaging with in our departments, and also how they're experiencing it from other directions. Understanding the role that imposter syndrome plays, particularly from learners from underrepresented groups. Understanding the idea of homophily, that people tend to cluster with people that are like them, right? So if a resident from an underrepresented group is in a program that is not comprised of people like them, right? How is the idea that people cluster together with people that they're more familiar with going to lead to feelings of isolation, lower self-esteem, and prevent that full professional identity formation? Understanding the idea of stereotype threat, right? That someone from an underrepresented group feels the pressure to say, if I do a bad job, they're going to think that everybody from my background is doing a bad job, and how that stress contributes to their ability to learn and function. And then performative allyship, just like Ken talked about, right? How are we as individuals having superficial engagement or not actually backing up the words that we're saying to try to make a difference in this space and support our faculty and colleagues? So for addressing departmental level factors, intentional education is something that we can really focus on, and this works in a couple different ways. So one is doing education with our residents, with understanding these factors that our co-residents, our co-faculty face every day in our departments, and understand how we are contributing to those things. Right? It's also doing a needs assessment of your faculty and your people from underrepresented groups to understand what they need. Ryan actually just published a study that talked about this. I read through it yesterday, where where he interviewed people that were in positions of influence for DEI initiatives, and some of the things that came up were that they needed intentional coaching and education on change management, on leadership, right? So understanding what our faculty, our colleagues, our residents need from an education perspective. We can use equitable evaluations, which is something that I'm particularly passionate about. The way that we're assessing our faculty and our learners, equitable, are they just, and do they support all groups of people rather than lead to inequity in promotion and advancement. This is a really great paper that sort of uses a framework for assessment development in medical learners. And what we can understand is that if our processes are inequitable going into our design, implementation, and evaluation of residents, we get inequitable outcomes, right? So when we think about designing an assessment, when we study it, does it look like there's consistently negative evaluations for a particular group of people? Right, understanding the context in which the assessment is performed. I have a resident who is non-binary and was working with a faculty member who said a disparaging comment about transgender and non-binary people, and so the way that we're assessing that resident, they got a bad evaluation from that faculty member because they disengaged, right? So that threatens the validity of that assessment and could potentially lead to downstream effects, right? Lower milestone ratings, potential for further remediation that they might not need based on their clinical context. Understanding the use of that assessment, right? So we know that with SLOEs in emergency medicine, there are differences in the narrative comments and the scores based off of gender, based off of race, right? How do those things relate to somebody's ability to interview at a particular program, right? Be ranked higher on their rank list, right? So how are we using our designing, implementing, and evaluating our assessments to make sure that those are equitable across the board? Right. Some other things that we can do, utilize and understand the word choices in our narrative assessment, right, particularly with gender differences, using specific and actionable feedback, right, rather than things that are just like, I don't know, they did a good job, or they weren't very professional today, right? What does that actually mean? Avoiding personality-based characteristics and focusing on outcomes and behaviors. And I talked about this earlier, but having limited diversity in evaluators, making sure that the people that are evaluating our faculty and our residents come from diverse backgrounds to try to mitigate some of that bias. And then, of course, doing a program of evaluation for residency and faculty assessment where you're understanding, again, like we talked about, sort of the ways in which we're assessing residents and making sure that those are equitable. Additionally, at a departmental level, engaging with mentorship. I loved that talk from earlier today, and particularly doing education about cross-identity group mentorship if you're in an environment that doesn't have many people from those underrepresented backgrounds. Engaging in equitable recruiting strategies, like we talked about earlier. Minimizing the minority tax, right? So making DEI initiatives part of your structure, right? Part of your organization and shared across groups rather than specifically the role of one particular person. We used to have a conversation about, do we need one of our APDs to be the diversity APD, right? Trying to incorporate that so that DEI and program assessment is across our entire organization is a way to mitigate the minority tax and also structurally operationalize DEI in our program. And then faculty recruitment, right? Again, doing it in an equitable way, but also offering people the things that they need from a faculty perspective to be successful in your space. All right, and then lastly, navigating institutional level efforts, which can be challenging for an individual. But making sure that we're establishing mental health resources, right? So does the faculty and resident insurance cover therapy, right? Does it cover a broad enough group of mental health professionals where people can find therapists that share identity backgrounds with them, right? Looking at faculty promotion criteria, making it transparent, making it equitable, and having sponsorship to sort of progress through that process. Using community initiatives, partnering with the local members of the community in your environment to develop those coalitions. Using peer community and mentoring initiatives. These have been threatened quite a bit. Like the sort of organizations across institutions in GME where it's, the black men in the white coat organization, or, this is our LGBTQ group in our hospital. Just because those things have been eliminated from a name perspective doesn't mean they're not incredibly important when we look at the needs of residents and faculty from underrepresented backgrounds. Identifying ways in which funding can be retained or structuralized, right, so that it's not a separate pot that's easily eliminated. And then, of course, navigating legal compliance, which is a whole sort of issue on its own. There is some guidance for faculty recruitment and retention and best practices. This was published in 2022. And I think a lot of these things are still quite relevant despite the current political environment that we have. Now, obviously, some of this, like creating institutional diversity leadership positions, has been extremely challenged in the last few years, right? And we talked about ways that we can sort of operationalize and structure those things. But a lot of these initiatives are still incredibly relevant in ways that we can continue to work even within the structure of our political pressure currently. And so I just want to end with this slide again. When we think about creating belonging and creating inclusive environments, we need to address these bottom 4 layers in order to achieve the top, okay? I think about, I have a resident who, we rotate at one of our more rural sites where it's basically an entire white population, a lot of Amish patients, and we consistently have black residents go out there that feel uncomfortable in that space, right? And so what we're not meeting is we're not meeting the safety needs, we're not meeting the love and belonging and the self-esteem, right? So to me, that's an inequitable thing that we're doing with our residents, and we need to sort of change our approach and understand how we can overcome those barriers so that they are developing, learning, and developing that professional identity in an equitable way. So that's it. Thank you.
I'm going to poll the room. Do you guys need a break, or do you want to keep going through and finish early? Decision fatigue. Okay, so I think we'll keep going if that sounds good. Okay, perfect. So we're going to jump into the workshop kind of portion. Can I have you hand these out real quick? Thank you. Perfect. Okay. perfect. So we're going to now put everything that we've been learning into action. And so this is really kind of a time that we can kind of gather together and figure out, how do we actually take these concepts, take these this knowledge that we've accrued and actually put it into outcomes that can actually matter. And I think for a lot of us as faculty, it gets really hard because protected time is really hard. So that's why we wanted to build in protected time here that we can actually kind of get together and talk about it. So this is our momentum mapping session where we'll turn this commitment into actual action. Sorry, I have this too. We have no disclosures. Just a quick, I think, in ways of roles, although we know we're much more than our titles. I'm Sri, one of the ADIM presidents. This year I actually have roles in court as well as the DEI chair for the last 2 years. Have helped to build some national kind of programs for building out the DEI curriculum kind of longitudinally at like academic assemblies and things. So I'm very passionate about this.
And hello again. I'm Ryan Tuchita. I'm the president-elect currently for 24 more hours, 48 hours for ADIM, and serve as the assistant dean of multicultural affairs at the University of Wisconsin. So do a lot of our diversity work there.
Do you want to do objectives?
So hopefully this is a practical workshop for you all that is going to be a little bit of fun. We really have 3 kind of main objectives for this workshop. The first is just to think a little bit strategically. Thank you, Adam, for reading that paper. That came out 4 days ago. So if you want to know someone who's on top of all the literature, he's a credible source. Because I don't ever get to papers that quickly. But this really thinks about thinking strategically, thinking intentional about what are the actual problems, kind of defining them. I'm going to encourage you all to use a little bit of a quality improvement type of lens. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we call root cause analysis that really tries to have a framework around defining and structuring those different challenges. The next will be to have some strategies. So thinking a little bit about how are you going to overcome them. We're going to talk a little bit about prioritization. When there's multiple things that can be done at one time. We're also going to think about what are those change management type of techniques that are going to be effective in this space. And hopefully this all culminates into something that is an action plan for you that's actually something that you can work with. If you want to peek ahead, it's already all there in your worksheet. We're just going to kind of slowly work down from top to bottom, and I think there's 2-3 pages there for you all to work on. And hopefully this is one where at the end we'll have you kind of share a little bit at tables and can report out a little bit. I actually really think that it's great that we have folks across all the spectrum. I just specifically want to call out the students. You're not too young, too early, too junior. You're not just anything. You are absolutely empowered to make these changes as well. So I would encourage you to think about what that looks like in your spaces. All right, that's a little redundant. I think I mostly covered this. So we'll go ahead to the next slide.
So if you wanted the virtual version of this, we'll set out the slides, but then we also have a QR code there too in case you wanted to do that. The only catch is if you scan that, just make a copy of it before you use it. Otherwise, everyone will be seeing kind of your action plan. And so that'll be the catch. But I printed out the papers as well, just so we can work through that today. But, in emergency medicine, we want to solve all the problems today, like yesterday, actually. Today's too late, right? And so the whole idea of this is trying to think about, what is in our locus of control? What would be the most impactful change that we can make, and then really kind of thinking about that and how we can move forward in that. So we're going to start with step number 1 on here. So that's going to be actually identifying the challenge. And as you know from this morning, we talked about so many different facets within the diversity, equity, and inclusion sphere that have challenges to it. But in your specific, institution, department, in your residency program, medical school, what is the kind of recurring theme at conversations or in committee meetings and stuff that keep coming up as a problem? Because that might actually help you to decide maybe this is something that I should actually focus on. So we're going to give you a couple minutes, but think about naming at least one challenge at your institution that you would like to see changed. And once you do that, actually think about, who is affected by this? Like, who are those stakeholders? That really can help you to figure out actually your coalition building later on for that. So just planting a seed. So think about who's affected by it and also why it matters. And this last one is so important because that will be your driving force throughout any barriers, any obstacles that come that will keep you moving forward as your North Star. Because we know resistance is always there and barriers are always there, but that will actually help you. So we're going to give you maybe like 2 or 3 minutes just to think about that and write it on the page.
For those of you who just joined, welcome. If you want, there's a QR code here. This gives you a virtual version of the worksheet that if you want to follow along, you can do so. All right, I see a little less pen writing, although I know some of you are still working on it, which is really great. So what we'll go ahead to do is the second step of the process. And this gets a little bit into some of the quality improvement frameworks. This is for anyone who knows, so I used to teach this at the medical school. There's something called like a fishbone diagram. And so you can kind of skeleton out these different domains in which are contributing to your problems. And one example, there's a lot of different ways to do it, is to break it into these 4 Ps. So it's people, power, policies, and practices. Sometimes you can add technology, you can add, that's probably the most common one. People comes up a lot. Sometimes it's like different resources or financial things. And then actually under that, so start thinking about with the problem that you defined, what are problems related to people? Not the people being the problem necessarily, but like, do you not have people? Or do you have people that are busy and don't have the time? Or do you have people that are in different locations? And going through each one of these, the people, the policies, the practices, and the power structures, how are those applying to the problem that you're trying to solve? And going one step further, within each one of those is what we call the 5 whys. And so every time you put something down, you should say, well, why is that a problem? And then whenever you answer that, you go, oh, well, the people, for example, the people are a problem. The problem is that we're in different locations. Well, we're in different locations because we have different clinical sites. And then just keep going to why is that the problem? Why is it the problem? And they call it 5 whys because you're supposed to ask yourself that 5 different times. It's pretty hard to get down to 5. But really trying to drill down into what's the core of the problem, right? Everyone's busy, right? Like, but why is everyone busy? Oh, that sounds a little silly, but you can start breaking it into the different competing priorities that folks have. And from there, the idea is that one of those will stand out. Normally this takes weeks to months to do, but one of those might stand out to you as like, this is the core problem. This piece, if we address, is gonna make the biggest difference, the biggest hurdle, help us overcome the hurdles that we're experiencing. So take some time, think a little bit about those problems, people, power, policies, and practices. Ask yourself the 5 whys for each of those problems. So trying to drill down to the root cause. And reflect for a moment and think, try to pick one, 2 maybe at most, of like, what are the real things that are changeable, right? So some things are not changeable 24 hours in a day, right? But it's changeable and you might have some influence or some ability to help make a difference on. So take some time to do that. Thanks. This is an open book test. You can look at your friends' answers. You could ask them what they're doing. Don't do this alone. I know this is the hard step. So. right. There's some really good dialogue. It pains me to interrupt it here, but we'll make sure that we keep moving forward. And just as a reminder, we'll all have a chance at the end to do a little bit more reporting out. So this is great. So I love, Sri, what you said earlier about all the books that you read and all the productivity books and change management books, because I've fallen into that trap too. So it was kind of fun when Sri and I were talking a little bit about this workshop. We sort of both came up with the same idea in a slightly different way, and that's kind of what we're going to talk to you about next here. And really thinking about how do you prioritize what you do with your limited time. And so Sri brought up hers first, and I guess she's going to present it second, so I'll let her present hers. But the analogy that I really like is this analogy about the jar and how to get everything into the jar. So the jar is, in this metaphor, you, the time that you have, the capacity that you have to do the work that you want to do. And the things that you do are going to be different sizes. It could be rocks, larger rocks. It could be sand, so really, really fine rocks. And it can be water. And it turns out that the order that you fill it in actually matters. And you can get more in if you do the rocks first. If you fill it up with sand, you can't put any rocks in there. But if you start with the rocks, then you fill in the sand, and then you fill in the water, not only does that help you prioritize the work, but it really makes you say, what am I doing first that's going to make the biggest difference, and actually allows you to do more. And so what we want you to do here, sort of like prioritizing that one big thing as far as your root cause analysis, thinking about what's going to be the big thing that matters. Because I can tell you, it's Monday morning right now, I'm getting a lot of emails. But answering those is like the sand, if not the water, right? I could spend all my time doing that, but it won't necessarily make a big difference. So what is the thing that you can do that's going to make the big difference, that you need to just create that protected time, carve out that moment in your day that's going to make the biggest difference? And Sri, you want to talk about your analogy, which I love?
Or we'll do it next, actually.
Okay.
That'll be stuff for you. Yeah. So if you want to take like 5 minutes and maybe name your rocks and the sand and maybe that water that kind of like fills up the space that doesn't need to, we'll jump into, I have a frog analogy that we'll do right afterwards. Okay, we'll probably jump to step number 4, but actually we were just kind of talking a little bit, but this is for work and for impact, for doing work in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. But don't forget about your authentic self in this as well too. So some of those rocks should be authentic to yourself and how to stay close to your identity as a person. Similarly, those that sand, the things that support those supporting activities should definitely be things that remind you of why you're doing this purpose, things that build you up. So while this is framed in the lens of doing diversity work, it definitely should still be careful not to let all of your whole jar get filled up with only work, that you forget about yourself in the meantime. What I was talking about, step number 4 is Eat That Frog. So this is actually a book that probably over a decade ago I picked up. It's a very small, quick read, but the whole idea, it's a book by Brian Tracy, is that, we have these things that we have to overcome. The ugly frog that's staring us in the face that we need to kind of figure out how to get past, or how to eat, if you will. And the whole idea is that you have 2 options. You can stare at that ugly frog, and it'll get bigger and bigger in your mind, right? Until it's like the size of the room, and you're like, how do I eat this frog? I can't. It's unsurmountable. Or how do you just chip away, right? Are you going to chew on this frog, or are you just going to swallow it whole, right? And so that's the whole idea, is thinking about and naming that problem that you have, or that challenge that you want to overcome, and attacking it right away. And this is an activity that I actually do with my family every year, sometimes several times a year, depending on how many crises I'm having. So I kind of have my kids do this with me. But we list out our top 10 things that we want to accomplish in that year. And looking at that, we name the one frog. What is the one thing on this list that if we accomplished only that in the next year, it would actually make a life-changing impact in our life? And that's how, for us, and that's how the book frames it, that's how you would prioritize it. Everything else on that list is great job, you did it. But until you eat that first frog, the one that's going to make that life-changing impact, that's the only thing that you chip away at day after day until you actually eat that frog. And I think a lot of us can relate that sometimes in our minds, it takes a lot more effort than if we actually just did the thing. Sometimes we were it's going to take me 20 hours to do this, and then 5 minutes later, you're like, I just finished that. What was happening? And so this is where we can really help to prioritize. So think about kind of on your list, what's the highest leverage next step that can actually help you to address that problem that you've identified in step number 1. And then I want you to focus on, what are the things that you could do, concrete, small, tiny steps that you can do to actually make an impact in that and move that dial forward in the next 30 days. Even if it's just putting it on your calendar. Even a simple thing is just carving out time in your calendar is really important. And there's some great habit stacking things that you can do. For example, if you stack it before, a lot of my work I do right before my shift or right after my shift, because then I include it into my work. So it's I have to get to work. I get to work 30 minutes early, and then I try to chip away at something that's there before I walk onto shift. I realized after shift, depending on what happened, it is not. I just end up wasting my time. So there's ways that you can habit stack this as well, too. But just take a couple minutes and think about what is that frog that's kind of staring at you that you need to address, and kind of label that, and then think about the concrete steps that you'll take to actually be able to eat that frog.
All right, everyone's eating their frogs now. So we're getting towards the end of the worksheet here. We have two final steps for you all before we do a little bit of report out to close this session. What I want you all to think about right now is about how you're actually going to take that first step and who you need to do it with. None of these can be done in isolation. Probably a misattributed quote of an African proverb is, if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go together. And I think that's a really powerful quote, and I think it's a powerful reminder that work can only get done when you have folks supporting you. And so take a little bit of time to think about who those partners are going to be. Who do you need to get that buy-in? It may not all happen at one big Zoom meeting or something, but it might happen more on an individual basis with some different players. So take that into mind. Think about the alignment with the institution. And so what is the narrative that is going to be clear to the institution about why this is important? So I really like Adam's first talk about some of the different structures of thinking about, like, this is the case of what inclusion, accessibility, access, belonging look like. And really, how do you make that clear to the institution? Because the institution doesn't want to be inaccessible or inequitable or have no belonging. So making sure that you're speaking the right language to the right folks. I'm a fan. It's an open secret that everything I do is a pilot, and so let's just try. Let's just see how this goes. We'll just do it for 3 months, and just to get people over that edge of like, oh, I don't know, because we're academics, we can think about it forever. We can design the perfect study, and we'll do it in 10 years or never. But let's just do a pilot. Let's just try. We'll do it for a few months, a few people, see how things go. And then commit to some measurement. What is that going to look like? And I talked to you all already about some of the tension around like how measurement looks and how it's changed. But is there a survey? Is there, what type of way are you going to measure the impact to make it clear to your leaders that this is actually mattering and making a difference? So take a little bit of time to think a little bit about those ideas.
Which I understand because like your connections are going to be with and like for the leadership and schools, a lot of them are like they're IMPs, companies that come to establish themselves as positions, and so like the connections are going to be from like their the preceptors, they actually work in very underserved communities, which is great. I really appreciate that. And there's still this barrier of connection sometimes. And I don't think it's just about the this is it's also just a cultural barrier, like being here in this country. And although the patient population is diverse, the areas we worked in. So first off, Chicago is like we work in one year or so. This is also in Chicago, and there's something they don't get it. It's wrong. I'm just like, it's wrong. I'm just like, don't say that. I'm sorry. There's that passion. And I think it has to go. Because we have everything else, like we have patient population, and we have community hospitals. That's what I went to my one hospital was in Chicago. It was like in the area. And I was like, wow, okay. So yeah, different types of clinics, but just now I think it is always so that was good. I know, is that good? Okay. Like, actually, answer was right. Actually, it's really helpful because I'm like, how am I going to say this? Like, I'm just standing there, you know. But like, I like that. Well, I just get it. So, definitely can't. That's not quite right. But, so, I was like, the population is actually a lot of people. So I'm like, it's other students that are just like, and then we have like a diversity in the clinicals department because it's like separated. And I was like, yeah, always giving us these stories and I'll put little things in there, but we never hear back about the service. I'm like, so what else is the service years ago? Like goes into like space. So I was like, maybe we could collect some of the surveys that they hear and then look at it like, just start right. Like there's something there already. Right. Exactly. Put it together and people understand. So you hear about the
Okay, we're going to jump into our last step then. So accountability and commitment. So there's a lot of like change leadership kind of discussion about, we can make a commitment kind of mentally, but actually like saying it out loud, actually saying it to others, having other people on your team who are accountable with you on that decision is much more likely to actually have that happen. So this is how you can have behavior change. For example, if you tell your best friend, I'm going to work out 5 days a week, right? They're going to ask you the next week, like, how was that workout? And you're like, I crawled out of bed. Did that count as a workout? No. But you have that accountability. Someone has your best interest at hand. So we're going to set a timeline. So this doesn't have to be like I know I like to solve problems in one day, but a reasonable timeline of what that goal or that frog that you want to eat looks like. And then identify maybe an accountability partner. It might be someone at the table. It could be someone at your institution, maybe one of those mentors or sponsors. But think of someone who could be your accountability partner that helps support you to get that goal accomplished. And then at the very end of this sheet, we actually have a little commitment, like one sentence commitment. So if you wanted to start filling that out, we'll ask for a few brave people to maybe share out at the very end. So we'll give you a couple minutes just to do this.
All right. Well, great work, everyone. Hopefully that this was a helpful exercise for you all. We made some progress. Now we want to just open it up. I think you all have done a good job probably sharing a little bit at your tables already. But if we have a few brave souls, then I'll ask that you do the microphone just because I think it'll help. Oh, thank you, Shri. But if anybody wants to share just a little synopsis of kind of what they've accomplished in the last 30 minutes, as far as kind of start with the problem. So start with the problem, and then a little bit about what your next steps are going to look like. Some brave souls. Awesome. Thank you.
Hey, my name's Robbie. I'm one of the vice chairs at WashU. So my partner, Allie, and I have the same problem, so we co-worked the whole time. So we co-chair our department's Belonging and Engagement Committee. So in terms of background, we had separate committees initially for wellness and DEI, and then in the current structure merged them, partially kind of due to the changing landscape, but honestly, they belong together anyway. And so we were doing a little bit of redundant work, so we're trying to really kind of keep the lenses together. So over the last year since we launched that, the hybrid committee started July 1 of last year. We've launched a lot of interventions, but have really been lacking in the assessment piece. And so a lot of the content today to have really that assessment-minded framework is front of mind for us. So now that we're coming on a year, we need to take that look back. As most departments struggle with, you keep getting the same faces at the table for everything that you offer. And they're, wonderful, dedicated participants, but how do we really assess the group that would benefit from it but does not self-select to come, address their barriers? Is this I don't think I need this knowledge? Is this what you're offering is really great, but I have other competing priorities or stuff like that? Our committee also serves residents, faculty, and staff. So we're serving a large department population with very different temporal needs and expectations too. So when you're an organization that has broad goals and serving a broad group, how do we create something that doesn't dilute the effect while we're trying to constantly serve all of those needs? So we actually were one of the pilot departments for the SAEM wellness survey. And so we have some baseline, more wellness-oriented data, and certainly belonging and equity is a piece of it. But we're taking our baseline survey, which was before our committee launched, and retooling it and actually working with the SAEM kind of wellness committee to redo and kind of see where we stand a year later. And we just have to hold ourselves accountable to that timeline. I think some of the root cause stuff was really helpful for us in terms of thinking of levers that we could pull. So who are the individuals that are our true champions? Who are those that are in positions of influence that we can really kind of pull along on the side to try to get their allyship, their collaboration, thinking of that really intentional coalition building? And I think we have not really looked outside of our department as much at the institution level as we should. So thinking through who our like departments might be. Anesthesia came to mind in terms of other collaborations. So thank you for the worksheet. We've both found it very helpful.
Wonderful. You have a lot to do now.
Yeah, we do.
It's great. I love that first part. It was almost like a needs assessment, right? Like, what are asking people how are we serving you? Where are those gaps? And then figuring out what that coalition looks like across the institution. So that's wonderful. Great. Thank you for sharing.
And if there's other departments that already have some of the work that you want to do completed, that you could also partner with them. Yeah. Or even within your institution, actually. I was thinking, because that's the easiest way to kind of get leverage is hey, at WashU, in this other department, they're already doing this. And so it just changes the standards, and then people want to meet that standard as well, too. So, yeah.
Great. A few others. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
I can share some very incomplete work in the sense that I'm not entirely sure what. So I worked as a postdoc at Beth Israel, and I worked on a lot of these multi-site NIH trials. And there was one in particular where near the end of the trial, we were 800 patients into a 900-patient trial, and we found that maybe we had low double digits of non-white patients enrolled across these elite institutions. In BI in particular, I was very confused by this because this was centered on cardiac surgery patients. And we found that almost every single patient who got major cardiac surgery in BI was older and white, which doesn't even ring true across departments, because in interventional cardiology, our studies, we had no trouble getting a more diverse patient population. In other surgical departments, they were pretty diverse, the patient populations, but for some reason, the cardiac surgery patient population was like 99.5% white. And I was thinking through it now, I'm not entirely sure why, because it's not, initially I thought it might be catchment area, but these are mostly elective surgeries. So it seems like, and the department itself, I don't think a single one of the cardiac surgeons was white. But the patients that were being referred to this particular hospital were all older white patients. So this massive NIH study, the only reason this was even flagged, the reason we really looked into this is because the NIH has that cutoff of we need this much diversity in our patient population. And we could not, it became such a monumental task. We would actively try to screen for patients who are minority. We tried to recruit UCLA to boost the Hispanic population, and they had such a difficult time taking off. We got Spanish consent forms for UCLA, but it seemed like the hospitals that serve more of these racial minorities did not have as much time for research and did not have the bandwidth. Within Boston, BU serves a lot of these communities, but they don't have, the anesthesia department there does not have a lot of time to conduct prospective clinical research. And I was wondering, thinking about how you could even start to address this. Maybe you could just really raise this with department leadership, research leadership, as something that's holding back these big grants that the institution is getting because you're not able to meet that minimum threshold. So I kind of got stuck there because I couldn't fully, really thinking it through, I couldn't fully understand what the structural, problem that's causing this is. So I think you start with flagging it and having some kind of analysis done.
Great, thank you so much. I really think that a lot of this work starts by seeing problems. And that's exactly what you did. You see a problem, you're like, something's not right about this, and all right, it's going to take a lot of work to start peeling back the layers of the onion and figuring out what's going on here. But it starts with, this isn't right, and noticing that, and then saying, okay, we got to do the work, right? You need a lot more people. We talk about your coalition, right? You need a lot of people around you to help support that. But it's clear to me that it's that there's an obvious problem, and then going from there. So thank you for thinking about that and for just your perspective and awareness.
And the root cause part, step 2, is really where you'll find your answers. Is you have to keep asking the why and tracing it back. And there'll be actually a lot of different stakeholders, including the patient population, with the medical mistrust, or maybe they're not being referred, right? Because we actually already know that there are certain populations that will get referred for elective surgeries much more than others. And then to speak the language of the stakeholders is what you said, is you're losing a lot of valuable money by not recruiting this important group. We care about that group because of their health outcomes. They may not, but they will as soon as it's tied to money and stuff too. So that might be where you can kind of start getting people, get people to be more engaged and more involved in actually getting those populations in, because we need them represented. So, yeah.
I think we'll take maybe one more, but one thing I'll say about all of this work, and you all have done a really good job with this, is it starts with questions, not answers.
Yeah.
And I think it's really quick to jump into these spaces and be like, oh, this is what we want to do. That's what we're doing. No, we have to figure out why is it the way that it is? What do we want to do? Who is it serving? Who is it not serving? And really being intentional about continually asking those questions. And then we provide a solution forward. So one more, either one of these tables, one more brave soul want to talk a little bit? Awesome, thank you.
Mine is more about patient care. I've just noticed how patients who are transported by ambulance, who have an obvious source of pain and don't speak English, have not been receiving pain control pre-hospital. it hasn't, like, nothing has been started yet. So where I'm gonna start is, like, I've gotten very good ideas about, like, data gathering and whatnot. But yeah, like, the story is, like, I had a patient who came in, was riding his bike, got ran over by a car, has an obvious ankle deformity, and EMS brought him in, and he had, so I asked him, like, what'd you give for pain? And he said nothing, because he couldn't quantify his pain. Didn't speak English. So I'm a little baffled, but it was not the only time. Like, it's happened more than one time. And I I don't know if other people have noticed that, and it's something that I need to figure out too. So yeah, I'm gonna start with some data gathering in terms of, like, how prevalent this is, or how often do people even notice that this happens. And I know that in the pre-hospital setting, there's not, like, interpreters who can help with this process. But I mean, if we can quantify pain for babies, we can quantify pain for people who don't speak English.
Great, thank you so much. Again, really observing a problem, right? And saying, okay, something's not right, let's dig into this, figure out what we might do. And I like the analogies, like, you're thinking about, okay, that's really, as I can imagine if you're trying to convince me, like, you're convincing me, right? You're like, oh, we can do this, right? Like, there's ways that we can address these issues, so thank you for that. We'll go ahead and transition to our last piece.
So we'll do our last session, but just want to, like, say thank you just to everyone for just being engaged in the kind of mapping it. As you can see, like, questions beget questions, but eventually we'll have the answers as well too. So I think that's really important. And oftentimes we're looking for these solutions to happen outside of this room, but, like, the change that you're looking for is actually within yourself and within this room and the networks that we have together. So I really feel strongly that we're going to continue the momentum that is going forward because our lives, our patients' lives, everyone, it depends on it. So I just want to thank you for that. We're going to head into Dr. Gibson to kind of round off our last activity, and then we'll give you guys your afternoon.
All right, still good morning for a little bit longer, but first of all, we just want to appreciate you all coming here and joining us. You could have been anywhere in the world at 8 a.m. this morning, you're here with us, so we of course appreciate that. And we have covered a lot of broad range topics, right? We've talked about how DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion is more than just a buzzword, and it's more than even a concept in itself, but it's a tool for advocacy. It's a tool for quality improvement, and probably of greater importance, it's a tool for social justice. And as emergency medicine physicians, we are social justice warriors, whether we like it or not. It kind of comes with the territory. So those are the types of things that I want you all to think about, and I'm going to kind of lead us in another small group of discussion about. But some of the topics that I wanted to revisit, and I want you really all to reflect on is, what is your North Star, right? What's your why? What gets you up in the morning and sparks your curiosity? And what really speaks to the altruistic values of why we continue to do this work when it's not always celebrated and rewarded, but sometimes even outlawed? And we talked about that earlier today. Who are your network and supporters? Who is going to prop you up when you leave this kind of relative safe space and help you to continue to do the work? But probably of equal importance are, who are the ops, right? Who are your barriers, your obstacles? What within your institution, within your region, is keeping you from being successful, or who might, withhold funding from your projects, your work, and your research? And also, you talked about this earlier, is how can you be an ally, and who are your allies? Because allies it's a verb, it's what you do. It's a title that is bestowed upon you by the marginalized groups that you hope to represent. So before you can call yourself an ally, ask yourself, are the people for whom I'm advocating for, is that the term that they would use to describe me? And if you're not getting hit by the stones that are being thrown at that group, then maybe you're not close enough. So don't be afraid to take a couple of L's, to take a couple of scratches, because if it's easy, you're probably not doing it right. And also, what types of micro and macroaggressions are occurring in your department? We spoke about this earlier. And what are we doing to create some of these safe and brave spaces where not only your patients can seek excellent care, but where your learners, junior faculty can flourish as well. So another thing that has kind of been the thread of the topic here is the names. Depending upon where you are, maybe your name hasn't changed, like Ryan's title hasn't changed, or like a lot of us, maybe you're no longer the DEI community. You're the community and belonging. But in the words of Shakespeare, right, a rose by any other name would still smell as sweet. So regardless of what your titles are, regardless of the types of resources that are being given to you within your department, the work is evergreen. DEI is, it's social advocacy, it's equity, it's what needs to be done. So I've kind of touched on a lot of the topics and phrases and things that we have all talked about. So I don't want my voice to be the last voice that you hear in this session. So I was hoping that someone, particularly maybe, no pressure, someone who hasn't shared or hasn't really spoken up today, but anyone and all voices are welcome. Kind of talk about what some of the words or concepts that we discussed or that you heard today that you think might be important for you to incorporate in your work as you are flying or driving or riding the train back to your department. What are some of the things that really resonated with you that are going to kind of keep you steadfast on as you pursue your North Star? Anyone? I don't want to make direct eye contact. I don't want to make anyone nervous. Okay, perfect.
Thank you, everybody. I think something that I heard a lot throughout the day and that is sticking with me is the idea of just like being able to pivot and adapt to all these things that are changing, whether it's like the language or the roles or the needs of the community that you're going into. I feel like just being able to learn as you go and work with others and change. I feel like that's a main thread that I'm pulling out here.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? I don't want to keep you because I know we have lunch and other opportunities and speaking engagements. Yes, is someone trying to put you on the spot? Don't worry. This is not that kind of event. We will not volunteer anyone who doesn't feel uncomfortable doing anything, but we do want to thank you for joining us, and we hope that the work that we have shared and definitely the work that you all have shared with us, as well as your tools of resilience moving forward has really resonated, and that you incorporate this into the rest of your time here at SAM, because one of the things that I think when we know that DEI has really succeeded is it's not extracurricular, it's not an additional step, it's just as pivotal to the work that we're doing, as far as just like you wouldn't skip cardiology or nephrology, DEI is the fabric of what we do, and we appreciate your expertise and your attention. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.